Have a request from Councilor Pell to switch item A and item B in sequence, meaning, I don't know, I don't see any objection to it. So I guess back to you guys. Rob Pell asked if we could switch item A and B in sequence, so we would present B first, but he's not even here now. Do you guys are opposed to that? No, okay. So if you're willing to bob and weave, Aaron, we will go at the request of Councilor Pell to start the agenda with next steps on Washington campus property.
Yep. Hold on just 1 second. I need to switch. Display settings.
Yeah, and as soon as you switch, then I'm going to switch it.
Thank you. I got it. Okay, good morning, Mayor and Council. It's my pleasure to introduce the topic of Urban Renewal Agency 6 in Washington project. I just coined it North Star project for the fun of it only once, but the main purpose of Urban Renewal Agency is to really improve and prevent blighted areas. These areas are detrimental to either safety, health, welfare, local community, and can lead to decline in property taxes and revenues. We want to try to make these areas as economically viable as possible. And that's where our Urban Renewal Agency comes in. Today we're going to be talking specifically about approximately 8 acres of property that we have on the north end of town, and that's why I sort of called it North Star. So the agenda today is, I thought I'd start off by just providing you with some site and zoning details so we're all on the same page and we know what properties we're looking at and how those properties may impact future development. I'd like to present a framework on an opportunity plan to guide the development of this site because Council has expressed an interest in moving forward with this potentially. And then outline best practices for plan development with a conclusion of seeking Council feedback to shape the next steps and begin engagement. So with that, I'll get started with the property itself. Now this is a general overlay of zoning which depicts a few different zones here that affect the property that we have in place. The industrial is purple. That is just a surrounding area. The property that we're talking about is in this block right here. But surrounding our property that we own, that we're considering for urban renewal development, is some industrial park, some R4, which is right here, and that is part of the property I'll be talking about. We do have some R16, which is this yellow here. And then on the east side, it's surrounded by general commercial. So let's start off by, there's 3 different main tracts of property that are under city ownership. The first is the Washington property, or at least Class Washington because it's facing Washington Street. This is 4.81 acres. It consists of 3.5 acres of general R4 property and 1.31 of R4, but it's technically also in a PUD, which I can talk about a little later. So you have this main piece, which is 3.5 acres, and you've got 1.31 acres, which is used for common area for parking and transportation. The next piece, which is the second of the 3 pieces that we have broken down, is considered the Midland property. This consists of 4 main parcels. 3 parcels are here, 1, 2, and 3. These are zoned general commercial and represent approximately ½ acre. And then you have other piece of property, which is 0.56 in acres, which are currently used for common area parking. And that's zoned R4. The third piece we're talking about is the Franklin pieces of property. Now the 4s that I have represented there are just a delineation to show you where the R4 is compared to the general commercial. This represents about 2.36 acres and 16 parcels. Of those parcels, there are there's 1 acre of R4, which is designated with the properties listed as a 4, and then general commercial of 1.35 acres. It's important to note here we have highlighted the 3 properties in blue, red, and orange. that are under city ownership. The properties with an X on those are actually properties that are surrounded by our property but are independently owned. So these have structures on them and they are not part of our property. This is an important thing to note because in the future, depending on where we go with this, the city may want to look at acquiring additional property based on what type of development you want to move forward with. Here on the slide for you also is just a makeup of the multiple properties that we have within our ownership. I also thought it would be important for us to just put in here the horizontal infrastructure, the water mains. They're blue, water service yellow, sewer main is green, and there's some fire hydrants listed with the red star. So you see that there is quite a bit of infrastructure throughout the property. Now the property came with, when we purchased it, an approved plan unit development and site plan and subdivision, which was done in 1984, and it still exists. So if we're going to move forward with development of this property at some point, there would need to likely be a termination of the PUD. The PUD has platted streets which are private. After we terminate it, if we do go through a termination process, all current development code standards would apply. Several existing lots do not have appropriate street frontage. If the PUD is terminated, a replatting would be expected. The zones that we're talking about that are under city ownership are general commercial and R4, which I showed you previously. Just wanted to provide you a comprehensive list of what type of development can occur on those pieces of property. And depending on what type of development you move forward with and the community wanted to move forward with, there are some options for a comp plan amendment and a rezone if needed, depending on what the ultimate goal was and what you wanted to achieve with these properties. But there's a lot that happens in R4. As you know, R4 is one of our highest density residentials. So you can have condos, apartments, and townhomes. You can have even some commercial to some degree in R4 zone if it's done right. Daycare facilities, schools, museums. And then of course general commercial is a very broad commercial use, and there's a large list, and this is just some of the lists of what can actually occur in general commercial zone. So the possibilities with this property are very broad. There's a lot of opportunity that we have, and so we could think big and come up with something really amazing that would help incentivize our economy in the north end of town. So we're recommending we develop an opportunity plan so we can really determine what we've got and what's the best uses for that property and for our community. An opportunity plan does a couple of things. It creates a shared vision for the site. It pools you as the policy board, stakeholders, and the community to come up with a vision for what we'd like to see in the north part of town. It guides infrastructure, land use, and investment decisions by having a comprehensive look at what that property can do. It aligns with urban renewal goals, job creation, tax-based growth, public benefit, depending on where you want to highlight your priorities. If you do an opportunity plan, it also helps gain additional interest from those developers, the right developers and partners that are professionals in the field that have experience in this would gain their interest also. It minimizes risk and maximizes returns financially and socially because we have a process that provides a product that will help us market this property in the long run. When it comes to this type of plan and best practices for an opportunity plan, there are a number of things that go into that. We'd be looking at doing site assessment and some context mapping. Of course, we'd be heavily into community and stakeholder engagement. Part of this process of an opportunity plan would be for council to work on a vision and guiding principles on where you'd like to go with this piece of property. We'd start some conceptual scenarios, then some infrastructure and phasing strategies, and then ultimately an implementation toolkit. So we'd have a really good roadmap on where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. Next steps for Grants Pass with this, if we were to do an opportunity plan, would be for us to engage a consultant and facilitator with experience in urban renewal and opportunity planning, to include a commercial market study also, launch a community and council visioning process, and I've sort of just in parentheses here sort of given a general idea and a time frame on what this would take from a time perspective. You're probably talking about 9 months if everything went well to actually come up with a good opportunity plan. With the community and council visioning process launched, you also develop a site analysis with some conceptual scenarios. We finalize the opportunity plan with phasing investments and developer criteria, and then ultimately release an RFQ or an RFP for development that aligns with your plan that you've developed. Some examples of other communities that have done opportunity plans and have utilized the Urban Renewal Agency: Redmond's South Highway 97 plan helped land a tech hub and 250 housing units. Tigard has one which led to some brownfield redevelopment, new roads, and housing. Bend has a central district area which created a mixed-use innovation corridor through community-led planning, and the list can go on. There's a lot out there because there are a number of these throughout the state of Oregon. Really, the final thoughts is this is an opportunity, this is a chance for us to shape our character and the economy at Grants Pass. We can really build something bold, transformative, and lasting. This is something that the community could really get excited about. So that concludes my presentation to give you a general idea of moving forward. If council is interested, we can do additional workshops, you can take no action. You can provide us direction based on today's discussion. You could also direct us to acquire and start to work on consulting services and the creation of a task force for future business meetings. The way it would be recommended is we would probably want to develop a task force that would then ultimately we'd bring on a consultant that would help us draft this opportunity plan for us with the assistance of the task force. With that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Any specific questions at the moment time? Kathleen?
So it would appear to me that we would have a lot of good ideas in our own economic development planning department. And so I would be in favor, or is it possible that we can do this without a consultant and just using the ideas of our own department, and what they would see would be some good ideas for this piece of property? Or what would be the need of a consultant? Maybe I don't quite understand that.
Well, you ultimately get a finished product and an opportunity plan, sort of like a facilities plan. It really gives you details above and beyond, plus a lot of work goes involved with having a consultant there to do market studies and environmental analysis also from a standpoint of commercially and mixed use, how that might impact the city. We can do something, but the big projects that get the developers that are interested, that have experience, have developed an opportunity plan with the assistance of a consultant. So we can really think big and dream big and have some good experience coming in to help us do some additional market research. I don't know if Brad has anything to add to that.
No, I concur mostly. I think from a time management standpoint too, you know, a lot of times once you kick these kinds of activities off, the public, you know, the conversation begins, and so it's nice to have the bandwidth to be able to move the process along relatively quickly and in a very predictable way. And that, I think, is another advantage of having, you know, somebody who's just dedicated to this project. We could get pulled off, you know, with some of our team with other applications or permits or other things that might come up. And so that's just one big advantage to having somebody. And, you know, there's a level of awareness about the overall regional and state market for somebody who works in this field that we locally may not necessarily have, or at least it would take us more time to research versus somebody who is kind of, embedded in this work a lot. It's just, they're able to kind of answer on the fly in a meeting or with the community to answer questions. So those are a couple other thoughts.
When you're talking about a catalyst project like this, I haven't seen a catalyst project done from an in-house with only in-house assistance. There's been a consultant that's helped develop these opportunity plans for the cities that have had successful urban renewal catalyst projects.
Rick?
Thank you, Aaron. I believe in the presentation you indicated that the funding of the consultant could come out of the urban renewal funds.
That's correct.
Okay, okay.
It would not require general fund assistance.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? I have a question. What's the overall cost that the city outlaid for all these properties together? To purchase?
$2 million.
2 million? Oh, how much did we purchase it for?
Yeah.
We purchased the properties for $2 million.
Okay.
Yes.
And then do we have any idea in regards to a range or a ballpark on what a consultant would be charging to do an opportunity plan, as well as like how boilerplate, like how long it would take? Do we have any realm of idea on that?
In looking at what other communities have done, I mapped out from a time perspective about what I've seen in other communities. It's a 9-month to a year process to do it right. From a cost perspective, Brad might have a better idea of what some of the consultant costs might be, but I'd only be giving you a really broad ballpark guess at this point.
Then that's all I'd be asking for at this moment in time. Broad.
Yeah, I mean, depending on, the qualifications of the people on the consulting team that we get, their hourly rates are usually going to range from, $125 to $200 an hour. So depending on where they come, travel costs, I mean, you're certainly, it's really tough to know until we lay out the time frame. But I mean, you're definitely talking about well over, 30,000 for sure.
Okay. So I guess my concept was to get, are we looking at $300,000 for 90 days or nine months, or are we looking at like 50,000 for the 9 months? But it'd be kind of lower range.
It'd be on the lower end,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Just trying to get a concept. Any other questions? Joel?
So I was wondering, in terms of strategic thinking, 5 years from now, what would we expect to see? Who owns the land? What does it look like? And I realize some of that is going to be a product of the process. But you just give me an example of 5 years from now, what the possibilities are.
Well, ultimately, in most of these, unless you're doing a public project only, you're looking at the city has purchased the property. We purchased it for $2 million. Depending on what your goals are, your goals might be varied, but that will have a lot to do with it. The majority of the time, the key is what urban renewal dollars is trying to do is you're trying to take public dollars to incentivize private investment. So you want to do a large commercial hub, or you want to do a mixed use hub with residential and not affordable housing, but workforce housing or whatever it is, depending on what the market drive is, you usually discount or help alleviate some of the impediments to that property being marketable in exchange for what you want to have done to the property. And then ultimately that property and the ownership of the property goes from the city to the developer, and that's how you get it back on the tax base.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any further questions? Victoria?
Will you go back to slide 7?
Oops.
Oh, yeah,
How about right there?
yes, that right there, thank you. So will you explain to me, just orient me again on the ones that are in X are privately owned at this point, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so then the strip that is along the top right is
Here?
city-owned?
Yes.
And then the large one?
Yes.
A city-owned?
Yep.
And then
Down
the
here.
third was this, okay, and that is also city-owned?
And all in here,
Oh, and all in there as well?
and there, and right there,
Oh, gotcha.
and then all in here. just really, if you take this, I'm marking out the outside border, that's all city ownership except those 5 X's.
So each one of these city-owned properties could potentially be developed for different purposes, or are they limited, are they the same?
So, as I mentioned, some of them are residential, like this is R4, these are commercial, this is residential. So you could utilize the existing PUD that's in place and try to market each property individually, but that you're not going to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Right.
When you look at this, you really look at it from an urban renewal perspective as a catalyst project. You're looking at picking up the largest, you may want it, maybe at the end, the opportunity plan says you need this whole block and this is what we can do with this whole block. It could be that, hey, we can work around all these things and this is what you can do. So it all depends on what your goal is and what comes out of the community's goal with that opportunity plan.
And would it be better to work with one developer, or in these types of plans, do you, opportunity plans, do you often work with more than one developer for more than one purpose, or just, what does that look like?
So opportunity plan, you've got someone that specializes in market conditions and impacts and urban renewal, and they usually have a team of individuals. Ultimately, at the end, when you develop an RFP, RFQ, you're going to potentially be looking at a number of quality developers that are interested in this piece and where your goals are. And it would usually comes down to a tough decision because you've got a lot of individuals, a lot of good companies that want to do projects like this, whatever that might be.
Could we have potentially 3 different developers for the same project? That's what I meant.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it'd be similar to, doing an RFP for a large project. We'll usually get 3 to 5 quality developers submitting bids or proposals. And then you have criteria based on that, similar to what you're going to be talking about later on today with criteria when it comes to a grant program and that kind of thing. So yeah, you usually get the interest of multiple people if done right.
We got further questions, Joel and then Indra?
So I'm kind of ignorant on these things. I've never been through one before, Aaron. Do we have one contractor, for lack of a better, we always award it to one person who develops the whole property, or do you award it to different people, different parts of it, or is it flexible, or depends on what our goals are, or is it just one developer?
I think it depends on what your goals are and your uses for the property. It depends on how big of a project you have.
Sure,
right?
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
I think your question, Joel, goes to the kind of the end of it. At this moment in time, we're kind of discussing whether we would
Sure.
put it forth to a consultant or put an RFP out for consultants to give us information in regards to building an opportunity plan for us. And then normally a consultant would go through and do that and then present information back to us, which can then be added or subtracted from that opportunity plan. So we would have the ability to mold that piece of clay as it's being done.
Makes sense.
And then, yeah, then
The question really isn't right.
yeah, it's not right at this time because you would have the potential during the process to actually mold that opportunity plan to see if you wanted just one big developer to come through or the multiple. Yeah, and I think at this time we're just kind of talking about does council want to go forth towards that opportunity of building an opportunity plan or so forth. Yeah, no worries. I'm just trying to give you as much information as I possibly can. Indra and then Kathleen.
Yes, Aaron, I had a question on the allowed land uses, because I'm not that familiar with the zoning, but the GC zone and R4 zone are somewhat interchangeable with some of the things. Can you, in a statement, like in words, what's the main difference between those two?
Well, thank you for asking the question, but I'm going to refer to our CD director, who could probably give you even a better answer than me.
Good observation, Counselor. Yeah, the mix, you could almost think of both of these zones as mixed use. So the city of Grants Pass doesn't have a mixed use zone. A lot of communities do, but these are about as close as we can get. So mixed use zoning, kind of gives a future developer a lot more latitude. They don't have to go through changes of rezoning and things like that. So These are really our most flexible zones. So if you see a land use that's listed in both, then, you know, those are outright permitted. You don't have to get any kind of special permits. Those are just uses that are allowed. You know, I think this is where the visioning comes in, because during the visioning process, you know, the community together, the neighborhood, the developers, you know, may say, well, what about this? Or what about this? And then that's an opportunity to kind of potentially even craft a development agreement that, you know, throws in a use or two that's not even listed there. So I honestly not too concerned about, I wouldn't get too hung up on the items that are up there, because they do grant a lot of flexibility, and because the zoning is local and it's not state, you know, there's no other layer over the city, we have a lot of opportunity to kind of craft the different land uses. The main exception being industrial and single family, you know, sort of if you think about a continuum, those are going to be two ends of the spectrum. And, you know, you would not see some kind of industrial use there. That's definitely not allowed in either one of these zones. And nor would you see single family detached housing. Those are also really not permitted. So, but there's a lot of room in between there.
And then Kathleen?
Okay, so I guess my next question is, would we get bids from consultants? Is that a bidding thing too?
You mean to help with the opportunity plan?
Well, in order for us to choose, you know, who would actually be helping us, is there
Yeah.
demand for that? Is there
Yeah,
interest?
we'd likely get multiple people wanting to do an opportunity plan for the city.
Any further questions? Victoria? Pause.
So just give me an overview of the history of opportunity plans. Is it a new concept? Is it an emerging concept? Because I'm just not familiar with them. Thank you.
Well, we could tag team on it. I mean, I think the concept of them has been around, you know, for a long time. I think, you know, different communities use different names. So you might not see the word opportunity zone used in, you know, Virginia. Then they kind of tend to take on almost like a regional. But the idea of taking a sizable piece of property that has the infrastructure there, where you have bringing the community voices together to identify what the highest and best vision is certainly not new. And I think, you know, that's part of the exciting opportunity here, is because of the size of the land, the flatness of it, and the fact that it's got services, and it's got frontage on a state highway. There's a lot of things that are unique to it that you don't see in most of our other properties. So I don't know if that gets to your question or not, Councilor, but.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? So in regards to that same question, is there any ability to get council a couple of these examples that you had brought forth, Redmond, Tigard, and Bend? Because obviously they've got published opportunity zones. I mean, maybe the council needs some kind of more tangible, like, look at what they're kind of.
To see what an opportunities
Yeah.
plan looks like?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that might help answer some more questions too. And then also, like, the way I understand it is basically because the city owns the piece of property, the city would like to maybe design that or have some parameters of design within that piece of property that would be more advantageous to kind of the look and feel and symbiosis of the whole city, instead of just offering it up to sale. And then you have the boilerplate, this is the zoning that you can do X, Y, Z. And so it's kind of an opportunity for us to mold it more congruent with the feel and think of our town.
Oh, you nailed it, Mayor, and that's the opportunities plan. You can think big. You can have a really neat, impactful thing north part of town when you've got that plan developed. And it's not just, well, we're going to have some mixed-use housing, we're going to have some commercial. No, you can really do some great things up there.
So Brad, just to clarify, so an opportunity plan would basically be what I would consider kind of like an overlay for that zoning, correct? Kind of like once you get to development, it would be kind of like just an extra overlay for that. So it'd be gives them some extra parameters on how to design within that box.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. You know, and we certainly can provide you that. I mean, you know, urban renewal agencies, one of the tools that they use a lot, you know, is exactly this, where you step in as an agency who is now a landowner and have a much more influence over the outcome of the project than if you just sold it and, you know, didn't care what it was, just say, hey, somebody come in and just build whatever you want on this. Because as an owner, now we have we step to the table with, you know, more influence over the outcome. So, yeah, and I think that's where you see a lot of urban renewal agencies. They can be long negotiations, and a lot of times these are phased, and especially when you talk about this much property. You know, somebody will come in and say, you know, well, I'm going to take this portion of it, I'm going to build this first, and I need the residential housetops, you know, to justify putting in, you know, a new retail or, you know, a bookstore or whatever so they'll often start with the residential, and, you know, that's where the negotiations can really help.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Any further questions? Joel?
Are we on to discussion?
Yes. If you have no further questions, which I didn't see anybody has, then we'll go into
Right.
discussion
Thank you.
on that.
Okay, my discussion is yes.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, so this is a massive opportunity. I mean, you see the size of the property, and it's literally a blank canvas. This can go in any direction that this council or a future council and community input wants to take it. Frankly, because it can go in any direction, and because it could be phased, and because there's so many different aspects of it that are really complex, and it does go way beyond the abilities of, or the capacity of our city or anyone who's on the dais or anyone who's on that side of the room right now could do on our own. There's no doubt that this is a way bigger project than Grants Pass could handle without a consultant. Frankly, and as complex as all that could be, and it could be 2 to 3 to 5 to 8 years down the line before it's finished or longer, the only simple part of this project, in my opinion, is to decide to create an opportunity plan and put out an RFP to get consultants, or to be able to choose a consultant to take the next step, which would be to create an opportunity plan. You know, the kinds of things that could come up, frankly, you know, when I look at this list, a commercial market study, absolutely critical. Like right now, we know that we have a lot of retail vacancies in town. We know we have a lot of excess office space. While originally, when council first talked about this a few years ago, we had mentioned, oh, what about retail, or what about office, or whatever. Well, a commercial market study might actually show that that's actually not going to be a really good thing we don't need more new versions of that stuff in town, but we'll find out what we do need with a commercial market study that's done by a qualified consultant. You know, what types of housing pencil, and, you know, will possibly determine what we want to put there, and what types of incentives would developers need to put certain types of housing that maybe council would want to see there. There's so much to that would go into this, but right now it is a blank canvas. And like another point that I'd like to add too is, with the exception of the X'd off spots, you know, it's a complete blank canvas. But in addition, you know, if we were going to put, let's just say that retail, some types of retail would look good in that property. Well, the retail would be a lot more valuable if it fronted on 6th Street to some degree. There's buildings to the right of our property that have been vacant for probably as long as I've lived in Grants Pass. And to possibly try to purchase those if we wanted to do more retail. But those are the kinds of things that an opportunity plan might point out. Which properties would be smart for us to try to buy? Where would it be smart to try to do a phased situation? What incentives would be needed for developers for different types of, and there's all kinds of incentives council could offer, whether it's tax abatements or things of that nature. So to me, while this is a incredibly complex potential, the simple part is actually moving forward with an opportunity plan. And one example, if you look at the apartments that we have over on N Street, the townhomes that were put in, I'm trying to remember when, around 2010, was it? I can't remember when. Those bring in well over $100,000 a year in property taxes, well over at this point. And that would be it would be two wins for our community. Number one, we could we could really optimize and increase our tax base on that property. Right now, it's a blank piece of land. And the other thing is we'd have the benefit of whatever gets built there. So there's so much benefit there, and it does go beyond. Planning this goes way beyond the expertise that we have within our city, quite frankly. We need to hire somebody to help us with that if we're going to do justice to the concept.
Perfect, thanks, Rob. That means that you would want to, would you want to push this forward to direct staff into entertaining, putting out an RFP to get consultants to weigh in on building an opportunity plan?
Absolutely, it's the only way I can see us moving forward.
Perfect, thank you. Any further discussions? Indra?
Yes, I agree. I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us, and being in the north end of town, I think it would really brighten up that area, and I think it would be welcome to all the neighbors and everything there. I've seen some of these communities, and they're really, really nice, and so I think it would be really good for us to push forward with. I do agree that we would need a consultant. It's a big project. I think the consultant probably I would hope, incorporate the community and the neighbors in that area so that they're on board. If that's not the case, I would like a task force first of neighbors in that area, businesses, community. I don't know that needs to be separate, though, if the consultant does that kind of work of getting people together, because I think it's really important to have the stakeholders in that area have their input for sure.
As an RFP, if you put something out in regards to having consultants weigh in on their ideas of an opportunity plan, you could actually mold that as part of the criteria. So I think that would be probably the most beneficial way, because they could, and I think most of them do that ground study where they, put the boots on the ground and figure out how it would more be acceptable and be enveloped into the surrounding community. Any further discussion, or would we just want to get a consensus on pushing or directing staff to go forward and drafting an RFP to look for consultants to do an opportunity plan?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Okay, staff, do you have direction?
Yes, we'll move forward with getting that RFP put together for an opportunities plan. Does council also want us to bring forward the formation of a task force that would work in conjunction with the consultant, or do you want that to be specifically going to council as additional items?
My input would be, I think it would be more streamlined to have staff put the RFP out, and then the council could actually direct the winning consultant to actually do that, but that's just my opinion, if anybody else wants to weigh in on that. Okay, I guess the question is if council wants to add developing a task force as well. Rob?
Well, I'd actually, if council chooses a consultant, I'd actually like to hear what the consultant feels about a task force, whether, because as you mentioned, Clint, one of the requirements would likely be that we're gonna ask the consultant or demand that a consultant weigh in with our community. Yep. That's one of the requirements. It's gonna be our requirement, I would assume. We're gonna choose to do that. And I'd also like to hear from the consultant what they think is the pros and cons. They may be they may think that a task force is a great idea, So I'd just like to hear from the consultant what they think about a task force.
And I believe it would be more efficient use of our time too to go and rely more on the consultant. Yes, Rob? Rick, sorry? I was talking to Rob.
I also agree with Rob's comments. I think it'd be much more efficient, as you indicated, for the consultant to do those studies and get the neighborhood involved. Thank you.
So we have currently directed staff to go forward and draft an RFP to get consultants to weigh in an opportunity plan. Is everybody still okay with just that? Okay, I think you're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next up, since we did switch the schedule around, now we are in Urban Renewal Agency Amendment. Oh, do you have one more comment? Oh, sorry, Rob, did you want to comment? Oh, sorry. I'll turn it over to Brad.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So continuing on wearing your urban renewal hats, topic is also related to urban renewal, specifically the public swimming pool project and the funding that was allocated for that, the $5 million that has now been taken away from the pool. So we need to have a discussion about where you would like to see that go. So I'm going to start out with just a little bit of background. And then Dana Pierce, our Economic Development Manager, is going to come up and continue on. So our two main subjects today with this, a plan amendment, Urban Renewal Agency plan amendment to reallocate the $5 million for the public swimming pool, and then a potential amendment to remove the Caveman Pool as a URA priority project. Background-wise, December of '24, the board adopted Resolution 247512. That created a 5-year implementation strategy for the Urban Renewal Agency. That outlined a number of different types of projects to kind of help focus the agency where we want to go in the next 5 years. It's a 30-year plan, but the 5-year implementation strategy kind of helps break that down a little bit. So it's sort of a revolving strategy. That was adopted for the first time just last year. Then in January of this year, this council passed a motion suspending the pool renovation project and also passed a motion suspending the use of funds, URA funds for the pool. In terms of plan amendments, we've had a couple of them for the plan since it was adopted in 2016. ORS does allow for that. There's substantial amendments and there are minor amendments. Substantials take a lot more work or a lot more time because you can't do a substantial amendment without going back to all the taxing agencies that are impacted by the urban renewal plan. So that is pretty involved. It does, a couple of examples are up here, adding land to the urban renewal area that exceeds 1% of the existing urban renewal boundary. Right now, I think we're somewhere in the range of 1,700 acres that are in the urban renewal boundary. And so that's when we're talking about going more than 1%. You're looking at a substantial change. Increasing the maximum amount of indebtedness. That's another thing that the state statute says you have to do a substantial amendment for. Right now we're about $105 million of indebtedness, and so we're basically working within that range. And as long as we do that, regardless of what you do with the projects in the plan, then you don't have to go back and do some kind of big amendment. But if you were talking about increasing that indebtedness to the agency, then that's what would trigger going out to the other agencies. The minor amendment is basically everything else. So, and here are the two that we've done to date. These have both been minors. We have not done a substantial amendment up to this point. The first amendment was in December 2020, and that was when we added about 5.5 acres to the district boundary. These are up near the Winco property on Terry Lane. There's a couple of properties there that are vacant. Those were added into the urban renewal boundary that were not there when it was created in 2015. There was also some goals and objectives that were changed in 2020. And the big ones being we added 3 new projects that were not part of the original plan. Downtown improvements, housing, and the public swimming pool. So that was the 2020 amendment. Then in June of 2022, there was another amendment that actually added the land that the pool sits on now into the boundary of the district. The pool was added as a project in 2020, but the land wasn't actually brought in. So we drew up a legal description, added that property in. That was the first part of the second, the first part of that minor amendment. The second one was removing the convention center. That was the largest project financially in the first urban renewal plan, was to look at the feasibility and potentially invest in a new convention center for Grants Pass. That was removed as a project, and then the majority of those funds that were for the convention center got shifted over to housing. So here's the boundary. You've seen this several times. The yellow is the boundary currently of the Urban Renewal Agency. Starts on the north end of I-5, kind of follows the 6th and 7th Street corridor, and then is primarily the north side of Highway 199. And then the industrial park, Spalding Industrial Park, is also part of that. And then here is the current, most latest. Again, you've seen this several times. It just lays out the allocations. Again, this is of the 30-year plan. It's not that all of these monies are sitting in a bank account somewhere ready to be spent. This outlines what over the course of the plan is the targeted amount of investment that the agency will make in each of these different areas. So as we were talking about earlier, the downtown plaza, streetscape lighting, those are $2 million. And the housing is currently the largest investment that the board has decided on at a $10 million figure. And then the main one that we're here to talk about today is the public swimming pool. Has that $5 million. Your motion kind of informally, suspended that. So now the real discussion is, where do you want that to go? That $5 million to go. So Dana's going to come up now and kind of walk us through some of the options for that.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, let's see. We're just going to take a quick look at the 5-year strategy currently and where those funds have been allocated for the 5 years. There is the project of the water treatment plant debt service, and that's a 22-year annual payment that we're looking at. The completion of the Owl Plaza, and right now we're on track to complete that in FY26. So that's moving forward. Washington campus, the Catalyst project that we were just talking about, obviously that purchase of property already occurred, but it was listed as a priority in this 5-year strategy, though I don't think any funds were allocated at the time for that. And then we do see the public swimming pool listed here. We know there's $5 million currently allocated there. And then urban renewal grant program. Right now, $250,000 is annually designated to that program or budgeted for that, for eligible grant projects. And then with the removal of the Caveman Pool and that $5 million, we could take a look at these other priority projects that are also listed in the 5-year strategy, but also don't have funds allocated currently. So that would be the water, sewer, and transportation in Southeast Industrial. That's what we all call Spalding Industrial. And then a housing development program, which is a little bit broad. We have some opportunity here. This is also the financial allocations that were set out in that 5-year strategy. You can see the breakdown for the next few years, and what we're really looking at is here at the bottom with the public swimming pool. $2 million was allocated in FY25, and then $3 million in the next two years, so that would be FY26 and 27. If we're looking a little more in detail at the priority projects, the Spalding Industrial area, we know a little bit about the cost of that project. It's estimated to be about $4.2 million for the sewer main extension, and then $10 to $15 million for the water main extension to go to the east side of Jones Creek. Right now, we have a proposed $2 million EDA grant application, and if that were to move forward, we have the matching funds currently that would complete that project. When we're looking at housing development opportunities, of course, we keep going back to the Washington campus because that seems like the biggest opportunity at this point. But we've also already drafted a systems development charge buy down program. This is just an opportunity that several cities have implemented with urban renewal in order to help reduce costs for SDCs for developers. It helps them pencil out and stimulates development. You're maybe familiar with the Vertical Housing Development Zone Program, or the zone itself, but we currently don't have a program. So that's something we could look at developing in order to get that incentive out to developers in the community. Other requested developer incentives have been permanent SDC waivers. So it's information that we know and something we could consider developing more if the agency is interested. I wanted to include this as well. This is there was a downtown development study that looked at the market and strategic recommendations for the downtown. In that study, some of the results that came out of that were that the market conditions and grants past signal growing demand for residential and commercial space. That the city can support residential and commercial development through some of our existing financial incentives. And one thing that was actually specifically called out in there was the Redwood Hotel redevelopment. Something that assessment reported was that the estimated costs exceeded the projected value, so making it a high-risk investment at this time. It did also note, though, in there that if you could significantly lower costs or achieve a higher average daily rate, that it is there is some potential. It's possible that it would be viable, but just something to consider. That report also went into depth on potential housing developments that could, and this of course was focused in the downtown area, but I think it's worth looking at and considering. The consultants that we worked with evaluated this and saw that, 3-story apartments on low-cost sites with high rents are feasible. But taller buildings, they would incur higher costs, and that would exceed the potential revenue that they would need additional support. Also, mixed-use apartment buildings would need incentives, and some of those incentives would be potentially the vertical housing development zone, which are tax abatements, or free land to pencil. So again, we're looking at low-cost sites that are going to make these projects work. And then larger sites could offer more flexibility, but also, again, involve higher costs and market risks. So it's important to have low-cost sites. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to read my notes here, but there's a lot of notes, so it's long. The cost, the point on the larger sites was that the costs could be high for developers, so they become hesitant to proceed in some cases. Something to note is just property acquisition is one strategy that can be used to support the development of low-cost sites, which we're seeing at the Washington site. And we also discussed previously that the advantages of the city acquiring some property is being able to control the use and or design of those sites. Other catalyst projects that were brought forward, I guess, during the July 16th workshop on this implementation strategy were the Redwood Hotel, the Caveman Plaza, and Riverfront Mixed Use. At that time, the URA board was receptive to a catalyst project that would help with developing underutilized land, creating jobs, creating increases in future assessed value, market rate housing, those sorts of things. So we'll take a quick look also at the Caveman Plaza. Originally, the plan allocated $1 million in Project 11 to the Town Center Plaza. That's the same property as the Caveman Plaza. This paragraph just gives you the description that's in the current plan. But in 2021, the council did include the Caveman redevelopment in their strategy. And in December of 21, there was a resolution to form a task force. But I think the timing just wasn't right. That didn't move forward. And so this may be a project that the council would consider revisiting. Here's a breakdown of some allocations that could be considered for this $5 million from the pool. We just did a basic breakdown here. It's nothing super formal. But you can see listed there, of course, at the top is the RFP for Washington campus. We got it broken down, so there's, you know, a time frame that we anticipate to implementation, and a difficulty level. You know, some of these are simpler projects, and some are more complex. A level of partnership that might be required, and then the potential allocation. So we could just go through each of these. The Washington campus, we see, you know, 6 to 12 months. It would be pretty easy to implement this. A medium level of partnership, that would be with a consultant in the community. And we did just put an allocation in here of roughly $200,000. If we look at the Southeast Industrial, infrastructure with grant assistance, this could be implemented quickly. 3 months, and we could also provide 25% of street improvements. This is actually specific to a grant request that's coming forward, and it's something that we should talk about that one separately. I apologize. The next one is more related to the actual cost of implementing that sewer infrastructure, or the water infrastructure, I'm sorry. And we could look at 3 to 5 years. It would be more difficult to implement because it is infrastructure. The costs are high. We have a lot of challenges related to crossing the creek there at Jones Creek, but you know, the council could consider allocating some funds to move that project forward so that we could expand the water infrastructure. The Housing Development System Development Charge Program, that's something that's already been drafted, so within 3 months, this would be an easy implementation. If the agency was interested, they could allocate a chunk of funds. We're just recommending a potential like $1 million you put towards this. This is something that developers could access right away to stimulate development for housing. Also the Vertical Development Housing Zone Program. Again, we don't have a program established for this, but we could probably put something together in 3 to 6 months and start engaging developers on this to try and support additional housing development. With the Caveman Plaza, it would be a private and public partnership, so it's a longer term investment here. We'd be looking probably 2 to 5 years in our 5-year strategy. It's moderately difficult and would take a high level of partnership. Here's just a potential allocation of maybe $1 to $5 million on that project. And similarly to riverfront mixed use, it would require private partnership in order to implement this and have it happen. So it's very similar to that Caveman Plaza project. As far as cost implications, it's Urban Renewal Agency funding. It's in the FY26 budget, and it's $5 million, and right now currently included in special payments. And the expenses are really just staff time to make the plan in and strategy modifications. And then the call to action really are just to answer some questions. Which projects would the URA board like to prioritize? How much would the URA board like to allocate to each priority project? And would the council like to retain the swimming pool, public swimming pool project narrative to the URA plan for future public-private partnership opportunities? There's a couple different, I didn't talk about that previously, but you can make a change in the narrative of the plan, or you could remove projects altogether, or you can retain it in the case that there might be some potential to use it later for a different opportunity, so. I think
Perfect.
that's all I have for now, but yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I have a bold questions to start out here. From your knowledge, can URA dollars be utilized to start up and fund a municipal court? Or is it outside the realm of the definition of urban renewal dollars? It's just a question I just want to throw out there real quick.
Yeah, I would say no. Well, I don't know the answer, I guess. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I
That'd be a
obviously
stretch, right?
can't cite you the exact ORS, but I do not believe that would be a legitimate use of URA dollars.
I just want to get that question over and done with in the very beginning, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, the purpose of urban renewal is really for private investment, I mean, to stimulate private investment. So
absolutely.
even though we do allocate funds for public projects to some extent, it's really more for the public benefit in those scenarios, and yeah.
It's a gap too far, but if you never ask the question, you're never going to get the answer. Thank you very much. Back to council, Rob, Rick, and Joel, and then Indra.
So if I'm not mistaken, actually also to answer your question, Clinton and Aaron or anyone could correct me if I'm wrong, but also with URA money, it could be used for recreation and or park stuff, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be commercial, which is how the pool got on there to begin with, and how I think Riverside Park got on there also. So it can be used for recreation, but not really unlikely municipal court. But because somebody might ask, well, how did the pool get on there? That's not a business thing, yeah. So on the riverfront mixed use, public-private partnership, what specific locations are we referring to?
We do have a specific river tourism commercial zone, and I think that's what the focus would be on for that type of a project.
Yeah, which is
where that is?
It's on the east side of the Caveman, or I always get when I head north. It's up the Caveman Bridge. It's the what we have been referring to as the West Riverside Park area, and then continuing over for another, quarter mile or so. So that's the main area there, and then there's another zone that is further down downstream of the river that is property really close to the fairgrounds, between the fairgrounds and the river.
Right. So it's where there's mobile homes right now.
Yep.
So it's basically mobile home area. Thank you.
Rick?
Thank you, Dana. Could you go to the slide, Other Priority Projects, Housing Development Program? So, okay, so you indicate there developers could request incentives such as SCC waivers. So could the URA money be used to pay the city's cost that is being waived for an SDC?
Yes, that's usually you would set it up in some sort of a program of some kind, but that's similar to like the SDC buy down program. That's essentially what's happening in that program is the URA is paying the costs or a certain amount of the costs. It doesn't necessarily have to be all of them. It could be a percentage. It could be just a set number to help reduce those costs for the developer.
Okay, thank you.
Joel and then Indra?
So could you go to the amended plan allocations project slide?
Plan allocations.
There we go. So I'm looking at a previous document that was submitted that talks about the Urban Renewal Agency and its operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2026. And it shows the current plan as amended in June 2022. And the total of the projects here were $50 million and so many hundreds of thousands. And there it's 60 million. And every project is the same, except sewer plant and water plant are listed here as a percentage and up there as absolute number.
Yeah, that's correct. So
So what was the change?
because the council did agree to do the annual payment for the water plant, so that is the total amount that is coming out of the urban renewal plan now. Before, we didn't have that number, we only had the 18% listed, so that wasn't included in the total, but now that we have that number, it adds on to there.
Okay, so what we had before with the 18% for the water plant loan was, the estimate was low, and this is the exact estimate of, because the cost
That we're
increased.
currently at, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
So then the other thing we have here is, there's several different items of the allocation. We have public park improvements. We have blighted building removal and/or replacement. We have building rehab program. I didn't see any specific projects specifically for the public parks, but the other two as well. Do you know in the existing plan what those projects are? Or do we have them identified?
Well, typically what ends up happening, we have our general allocation, and then if their funding is going to a project, it goes into an LB project of some kind. So I don't know specifically, maybe Brad can't speak to the specific projects. I mean, some of these funds have already been allocated though, over the last.
And what have they been allocated to specifically with the parks, public park improvements?
There's definitely funds that have been allocated for Riverside. The amounts I would have to look up for you. I don't know the exact amounts.
Yeah, and what projects?
Those are all listed in the capital books that we provided for the budget committee. We'd have to
Okay.
get the capital book out, and you could go through, and every time you see Urban Renewal Agency and a dollar amount associated with the parks project, that's a designated amount of urban renewal dollars that might go to
Okay,
that
so
project.
so I'll go through the capital budget, and it should list the listed projects for parks and also for those building rehab and also for, what was the other one? There was one more. Anyway, okay, so I can do that. The reason I was asking, Mayor, was we're putting out a request for interest in the caretaker's cottage, and in that proposal or request for proposals for interest, it doesn't list any funding of either grants, which our contractor that was up here before said that we had, or funding possibilities for a private-public partnership along the river. And so before I'll refer back to that on agenda review, and we need to get the specifics out that, plus look at our consultant and see what the price was, because it was much less than what the city had estimated, and then we can examine that in detail with proposed funding. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Indra?
So with the pool, so if we move that 5 million out, is there any left in there, or that would be gone completely?
You can reallocate all of the funds and keep the project and just have it zeroed out, or you can choose to eliminate the project completely. Those are things that can be done within the amendment.
Okay.
And that's up to you.
And when I first came on board, we talked about the Caveman Pool. There's never been really more comment on something the community really wanted to keep. And so I understand, I remember at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, there were talk about 1 million to repair the lining and keep it functional versus 6 million to really do a overhaul and upgrade. Is the pool, is it functional now and into the future with how it's going, or something really needs to be done to keep that functioning?
Thank you for your question. I'm going to pass this over to Brad. He has
Yeah,
the
it's-
details.
Interesting timing of the question, Counselor, because just late last week, we had filled up the pool for this season, and we went through the steps of testing the valves and the pumps, and then it turned out that the last valve we tested went bad, so we had to drain the entire pool. And we're delaying, it was supposed to open today, Can't do that because we're fixing a valve that we didn't know was broken. We couldn't know it was broken until it's filled and we test. All that to say, every year it's a question mark, what is going to work and what's not going to work with the pool. We know that it's draining. We know that it has an old boiler. We know it has old parts, and something's going to break all the time. So we continue to just put Humpty Dumpty back together again, piece by piece, small piece by small piece, and this is going to be a little 5,000 here, 6,000 there. To answer your question, we think that we are going to make it work for this season because we're just talking about a valve. But ask me again in 2 weeks. we just don't know, literally. It's that bad. So the pool is operational. We will have it open, but the whole point of this project from the beginning has been, if we want to be sure that and be confident as a city that we have a service to offer to the community, we need a significant investment. We could, $1 million would get you potentially a new liner. That would help to address the leakage problem that we're having. But it wouldn't get you some of the other amenities like the diving board and and other things like that, or the decking. The decking was another part of it. So it's. Yeah.
Do we have? I would like to see what would be the minimal to upgrade the infrastructure of it so it would go forward in the future without possibly all the nice amenities at this time. Do we have that figure?
So just to interject here, we do have this topic to come up in agenda review, so it is on for future discussion in the agenda.
Yeah, I think what the mayor was saying is we've got the numbers and the specifics you're talking about the pool were probably they're great questions, but they really probably warrant their own workshop, and we do have on the back of our calendar to schedule a discussion on Caveman Pool.
Okay, I'm just asking because today we're talking about reallocating, and I would be hesitant to reallocate all of that money if some was needed just to keep it functioning. That's why I'm asking.
And if council was wanting that, it may be that you might want to postpone any action to reallocate at this time until you've had that discussion about Caveman Pool before you reallocate, so.
Rob?
So there's the water plant loan, $9.5 million, $9.6 million, second line. Is that sufficient to support likely debt service to avoid a rate increase, or are we? What's hanging in the balance there? Are we going to need to
I'm going to hand
increase
this one
that
to
amount?
Jason.
So two things going on there. One, we will be asking you to increase that amount because it is not 18% of the debt service. By increasing this amount, still falling within what the plan was conceived as, you're still going to need a rate increase, but that rate increase will be smaller. We're churning through those numbers like crazy with our rate consultants as we speak, but we're still going to need a rate increase similar to what we talked about of about 2% or in that range, 2 and 2.5%.
So, thank you. And when you say you'd be asking council to increase that 9.6 million, is that what you started with?
Yeah, that was the number that we had asked you to approve. I want to say it's been about a year back now, just so that we could get into that queue. And that was the number of what we thought debt service was going to be. Now debt service is going to be significantly higher. So we would ask that we go back to what the plan originally projected. And it actually showed up on a slide a little bit farther back. I think JC must have provided that to you. If you could back up just a couple slides for me, Dana.
Is it?
There was a spreadsheet.
Okay, it's going to be this.
Maybe I was wrong. It could have been forward.
Is it this one?
We would be asking the payments to change from the 838 to 867 per year. And we were planning on bringing that forward to you very, very quickly.
Thank you.
Joel?
So then it says it's a loan, Jason, so that means then that it'll be paid back into the urban renewal?
No, what it is the plan was to pay 18% of the debt service.
Okay.
So if our debt service payment was $1 million, they would pay 18% of $1 million.
So then it reduces the amount that we have to borrow.
Correct. Well, it would reduce the amount that the rates would have to pay back because
Right.
tax increment financing would be paying back that 18%.
Right, so it goes towards the water treatment plant loan, but it is not a loan itself to the water treatment.
No, it just lowers the amount of
Okay.
the potential rate increases.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Kathleen?
And how soon would those rate increases of 2%, you're saying?
Yeah, what we presented to you a little while back was it looked like if we just went across the board with every rate that we have in place, that it would be about 2.5% per year for 3 years. We'd probably want to do that sooner than later, but when we went back and were revising those numbers with looking at, okay, if we bring in more money from URA, what does that do to the potential rate increase to try and minimize the impact to the rates? So we would probably want to adopt that for going into effect in the next calendar year. Not as much as because we need it right then, but it will look better to the bonding agencies. When we go out to take in those bonds, we'll get a much higher rating, which will result in a lower bond rate, which would be very important 20 years down the road. So we'll be asking you to consider those very soon.
Any further questions for staff in regards to this? Okay, seeing none, thank you. I'll bring it back to the dais for discussion and/or if you guys want to direct staff to go in a direction. At this moment in time, you guys can entertain reallocating this 5 million into different spots, or as Indra had brought up some valid information, is if you want to push your decision down the road a little bit until you have more information in regards to the Caveman Pool, because we do have a need for funding in that area. It's up to council, but we'll open up for discussion and/or action at this point. Kathleen and then Joel and then Rick.
So I agree that it might be wise to see what the estimated bottom line cost would be for the pool before we made this decision, but I'm seeing that Spalding has been a high priority for a while, and we'd like to get some industrial movement there and do our part to buoy up the infrastructure. So I would probably approve of giving some of that money to that project.
Thank you, Kathleen. Joel and then Rick.
So if I understood you, Kathleen, an increase in the water, sewer, and transportation for Spalding, is that what I hear you saying? Or
I think it's just
a different one, or the southern end of the northwest industrial area?
Yeah, it's the second one on the considerations.
Oh, okay. Okay, I would like to delay discussion until we have the swimming pool discussion, and see how much money would be freed up if we can help the swimming pool. The other thing is we would have the presentation on it's small peanuts, but on the caretaker's cottage down in Riverside Park as part of the public parks improvements. And it would also help tourism and economic development and the riverfront item. And so that's already included, but haven't specifically funded. But I think we need those two presentations before we proceed. And I like Kathleen's suggestion, though I might be more inclined to the southeast industrial area, Spalding area with the infrastructure. But I don't want to decide it now. I want to have those two presentations and then see what we're going to do and how much money we're looking at.
Thank you, Joel. Rick?
I would also like to see the two presentations in the future. I'm in favor of a adequate amount to maintain the pool, so I don't want to totally remove it from the urban renewal list, but I'm also willing to consider the majority of that money moving to other designations. Thank you.
Perfect. Any further discussion? So I'm getting a sentiment from you guys that you would want to postpone reallocating all the 5 million or any of it in regards to until further workshops presenting the cottage as well as the Caveman Pool. So delay? Okay, defer. Thank you. Staff, do you have direction?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
And thank you for all the information presented. Next on the agenda is addressing homelessness grant program.
Good afternoon and welcome to round 3 of our discussion on the potential grant program. So where we left off last time was to come back with a revised draft based on some of our discussion and to get some feedback from the community forum that we had last week. So I've made those revisions that we talked about. There were a few things that kind of popped up that maybe some clearer language was appropriate, and some of the discussion from the forum as well as feedback we received, there are some proposed language components to talk about. So I'm going to do a quick summary of the revisions that you'll see in the document, and then we're going to jump to the document itself. So we removed, as you'll recall, the portion of the purpose section that referenced the strategic plan. We took that out. We added some key dates, such as when replies to questions might be due, when we would expect to have an agreement executed, and when we would expect a project to be fully operational. One of the potential revisions that we're going to talk about today is adding a project requirement section. I've heard from a number of council members as well as some of the things in the public that may justify doing that, and that's going to be a decision for council to provide some guidance on today. We added the component that city funding may not supplant other funding. So if they already have funding for something, they can't get city funding to replace that. We added a questions section and an appendix that would allow to post responses to that, just so that we can make sure everything is being transparent. Anytime we get a question, the response is made public. Added the narrative question language about non-discrimination compliance and involuntarily discharged individuals that we talked about last time. Added a reference to and an appendix for a scoring sheet, and we'll go over that scoring sheet in detail, just to make sure that we're weighting the questions in a way that's consistent with council's expectations on how this is going to play out. We added a description, reference, and appendix for a sample contract, and it's the standard terms that we would expect. It doesn't have anything project specific because, like we've talked about before, that would be individualized based on whatever proposal we're looking to move forward with. And then we added the language that we talked about at the last workshop regarding non-compliance, termination, and city recourse. So I'm going to jump into our document. And go from here. So this section in the purpose is the language that we removed at our last meeting. And then with key dates, we put in final replies to questions posted as July 14th. That would give applicants several days to incorporate any responses into there. We would post replies to questions sooner than that if they come in, but that would be the final date. You can expect to not have any updated information after that date. The execution of the final grant agreement would be August 15th, 2025, and the reason why it's that short of a timeline would be because we are looking to get the pre-approval for the contract from the applicant. So we'd have a contract negotiated, hopefully, as of that August 6th intent to award date. And so we could go into that meeting knowing that the other side also thought those terms were appropriate before we brought it to council. And then if council makes changes, that might change, but at least that way we'd be able to say, council agreed, everybody gets to sign now. So we can make that a much shorter turnaround.
Stephanie, yeah. Could you tell us again what exactly the protest period means?
So when you're doing procurement, oftentimes if someone thinks that the process wasn't fair or that you weren't following the rules that you set, they're able to say this award is not legitimately awarded and you need to rethink this or go back. So that would give someone the ability to say you didn't follow what you wanted to and put a pause on things for us until we figured that out.
So they would basically have about a week from, you got the intent to award date and someone could protest for a week, basically.
Correct, 7 days is the standard protest period. And then as we discussed at our last workshop, we're looking at a 6-month period to have a project fully operational. One of the things that I believe was modified in this draft that's before you today is that we would give higher preference to an entity that could be up and running faster. That's just our maximum time period. We want to see progress or fully operational sooner than that if at all possible. So we're not saying in 6 months have this done, it's get it done, but that's the cap on it. I'm going to come back to the minimum maximum award. That's one of the slides that we're going to talk about, but it's at the end of the presentation because that's a big discussion after we've already talked about all the rest of the terms. The next section is on project requirements, and this is that new section that I mentioned. One piece that was in the last draft that you saw was that we would require any services to be located inside the urban growth boundary. We had already talked about that piece. It just would move it into that new section because rather than talking about that as an applicant criteria, it's more of a project criteria. And then the rest of this would all potentially be additional components. So we talked about that 6-month fully operational piece and that the shorter timeline would be scored higher. But now I'm going to jump back to my presentation and talk about the direction that staff needs at this point. So we've talked about the 150 minimum capacity, and we have that number because the court has said that that's what the city has to make sure we've got for low barrier components at this point. So we want to make sure we keep that number because if we want to be able to close our resting sites, we have to have some place for that capacity to be. We have, however, had some discussion at our last workshop. We also heard at the forum last week about whether or not we need to also have a maximum. So we know 150 is the minimum. Should we have a number that we are looking for as a cap to whatever the capacity would be?
Thank you, Stephanie. Before I ask for questions, the last time that we went through this discussion, even though it was our first draft, we were very long-winded and we were very long in the tooth on that. I would advise council to monitor your discussion and your questions directly to the topics at hand so we can kind of get through this efficiently. I don't want to stifle anybody's voice, but just monitor yourself. With that, first question, Joel?
The other thing, are we going to do this where you need feedback one item at a time, or are you going to go through all of them, or what are you going to do?
That's up to council. I can go through them all and we can jump back, or we can
Let's
go
just do
one
one
at
at
a
a
time.
I think
and-
one at a time's fine.
Yep.
Okay, so on the first one, 150 minimum capacity, I'd say 150 to 200.
So my recommendation on that, not to interject in front of anybody, but as we known in the past, when it comes to legal proceedings in regards to a lawsuit, sometimes verbiage that is put into documentation in the public sphere is utilized as the new benchmark. So what I would recommend is that the council draft something that says the minimum capacity is X, and the capacity that is agreed upon within the grant literature cannot be changed or exceeded without council approval, further council approval. So instead of putting an actual maximum number on it, you could put some language in there that says, this is the minimum we need, but if you exceed whatever we agree upon within the grant, then you have to come back and blah, blah. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
I'm okay with that.
Does that make sense, Stephanie? Is that logical?
It is. I would caution on that one, though, because then that means you are basically controlling what's happening at an operational level.
Okay.
And if you start doing that, then you're part of what is happening, and
Okay.
that's part of the risk and liability concerns that we have about some of the other proposals. The more hands-off we are on this, the better off it's going to be for the city.
Okay.
That being said, I think that maybe saying that we are expecting a 150 capacity and leaving it at that, and gives the flexibility where if the need in the community becomes higher, they're going to go higher. And the reason they're going to go higher is because the need's there, and hopefully they get the resources to do it. We're not going to fund anything above that, but the capacity for 150 is what the city would expect. So I can frame it that way, where our funding is looking at a 150 capacity.
And I appreciate your insight, because my recommendation was from the layman's term, and I appreciate the expert counsel on that. With that, is there any other questions in regards to this? Joel? No? Okay.
So the next component,
Question, yeah.
Yes, sir, Joel.
Okay,
Rob?
so Joel suggested 150 minimum and 200 maximum, and now we're just taking out any maximum. Someone could take this grant and go as big as they want, the way we're suggesting it now. Is that accurate?
not exactly. I can modify the language a little bit. As of right now, we are talking about, so up in our needs section, or our purpose section, we talk about capacity for 150. And down in the proposed language that we will get to, it references at least 150. I can modify that to basically saying we're looking for a capacity of 150. If they come back to us with more, we can say, we're not going to fund that amount. We would only fund this amount because that's what we think it would take for 150. And we could put those components into an agreement. So we can streamline it a little bit more without actually adding a maximum capacity.
So the verbiage you just suggested would still allow someone to go to hundreds more if they wanted to, as long as, right?
It would, but I can't imagine an entity is going to do that if the need isn't there and if they don't have the resources and support for that to happen. So if we put a cap on it and the need suddenly shows up, the city's going to be back on the hook for providing space because we have a unmet need in our community and we have to have a place for people to go according to, if we're going to regulate it.
Thank you.
Victoria?
Would it be appropriate to add language of the 150, and within the grant, the applicants would need to, if that number was significantly different, they would have to add that into, we would have to know why? Would that be, could that be a way we could do that?
We could do that. We could say if you believe capacity exceeds the 150, provide an explanation of why you believe that's appropriate.
And would that protect us on both ends with the definite public concern? And
Most likely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Indra?
I have a question. Are we just asking questions now, Clint? We'll discuss it later,
Yeah, basically, we're trying to
correct?
give Stephanie feedback so she can add or subtract or mold that stuff. We can go into discussion later. Any further questions in regards to the capacity? Okay, Stephanie, thank you.
So on that one, though, just so I make sure I'm clear on what we're looking for, would it make the most sense for council to just leave it at the 150 or to leave it at the 150 with allowing for an explanation of why 150 may not be sufficient according to the applicant?
Indra?
So if you're looking for that, I think we heard a lot, what I'm hearing, a lot of people do just want the minimum. And so I hesitate. I get that we don't want to be involved, but I would suggest a maximum, because there is no telling what they could do with that. And even though that's on them and their money, we still got them started with the seed money, so to speak. So that would be important to me, that it didn't grow out of hand and that we weren't instrumental in supporting that, because that will come back on council if that happens. And I don't want to be explained for that.
So I need a clarification. So realistically, the language that we're putting forth in this grant is basically, as Indra said, this is a grant money, this is seed money to start. This is not for further operations or continued use or continuing monitoring from the city onto this organization. So that is that, am I stating that correctly?
You are.
Okay. Joel?
I would stay at the 150 then. My rationale would be a little different. That 150 was what the judge said, and it would adequately serve the homeless population that we have, and it would be reasonable.
Okay. Are you still foggy?
I haven't heard anyone else say, let's add the language about providing an explanation in excess. Is there anyone that wants that language in there? Or should we just leave it at we want 150, moving on?
Indra?
But even though they would put an explanation as to why, it wouldn't matter because we wouldn't be voting or have anything to do with that, correct?
You wouldn't, if you don't like what they're going to do, you don't approve funding.
Yeah.
Right, but I think what we're talking about is giving funding for the 150, but if there's no closing as to go to 2 or 4 or 6 or 8, then they're free to do that. And even if we ask for an explanation of why you're going to 300 or 4, it won't matter to us. We won't have anything to do with that after it's granted.
Right, it would be, if we were looking for an explanation, it would be for the original grant of funds. If you think you need capacity for more than 150 at the beginning, why?
Victoria?
I just want to make sure that anyone can clearly understand the reasoning behind the language we would put in a grant, that it would be to protect the city and the public and reflect their wants, but that we are also needing to balance legal requirements, and we don't want that to make it more difficult on the city. So if we were to keep it at the 150 with no maximum, with an explanation if it would have to be higher, and also put that in, we also are going to ask this entity to come back to show us that they have kept the 150 capacity, the ADA compliance, the low barrier. And if there were any, could it be added then? Would that be a protection for the city when you come back at your yearly or whatever it is? Are there any changes in number? And then the city would have the option to definitely weigh in. Would that be a good way to do it? I'm just trying to figure out a way to balance both worlds.
You'd still be inserting yourself into operations at that point because you're not funding anything beyond that initial startup. So that's where the concern is. You want to stay at, we want to help get you started. And then where you go from there is going to be dependent on the community's needs. And it's up to the community to dictate what those needs are, whether it's the homeless population or funding from other nonprofits, whatever it is, that'll drive everything going forward. It's just what do we want to help them start?
And yeah, I think to answer your question too, Victoria, I believe within the monitoring reporting section within this grant, when we set the parameters of that monitoring and reporting back to council, that portion of the grant could be tweaked a little bit more to add more language. But I'm looking at it like when this organization is reporting back to us, we're going to be, when we'll be able to spot the red flags as they jump up, and we'll be able to address it at that moment of time. So, Indra?
I'm just thinking we want to address the minimal need because there's, this is just one operation. There could be other we're assuming this is the one and only, but somebody else could start another one with beds to meet the needs of the community. So I'm not seeing that we necessarily in this one step have to meet all the needs for 10 years of the community. I think right now we're looking at just getting them out of the A Street sites into something, so I would stick with the 150.
Any further questions?
I guess I'm going to ask for a thumbs up. Anyone at 150, leave it at that number, no explanation, no at least. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect, thank you. I thought that was going to be one of our harder questions, so hopefully that was one of our lengthier discussions. Next question is on ADA
I just want to be clear, when you're putting the 150 in, that means no more than 150, correct?
We are asking them to tell us how they're going to provide space for 150.
Thank you.
All right, on to ADA compliance required. I've heard a couple of different iterations of this, so the question is, do we need it at the time they are fully operational, or at what point in their process do we want full ADA compliance? My recommendation would be at full operation, because that's what we would consider checking all of our boxes. But at any other point, we good with at fully operational? Okay. And then we have our low barrier 24/7 managed site. One of the questions is whether or not we want to define low barrier. I know there's been some confusion about that topic. And do we want to add in any ideals beyond what the minimum low barrier would be? So do we want to reference couples, pets, other things, have higher scores in the scoring worksheet if they're providing additional services? Because there's two real components to this. There's the shelter, the actual physical shelter, which is what's going to get the city's burden off. That's what's going to help us eliminate those resting sites. But there's also providing services to those people that are being sheltered. And that's not part of a low barrier shelter necessarily. It doesn't have to be. It's just a bonus when it is. And so if we can do the higher score for services that are provided, like housing assistance, addiction recovery, mental health, employment, all of those things. And we tend to talk about them in conjunction. So that's why I want to make sure that we're clear on what we're talking about when it comes to that. I do have some potential language that would address that if we want to include that language in the grant program. So,
Rob?
So virtually every person I've talked to in Grants Pass, you know, at this point anyway, it wasn't true a couple years ago, but virtually anyone now seems to be agreeable to basically giving people a hand up rather than a handout, and like wanting to see people that might be housed or sheltered in a climate of encouragement for self-improvement. And if we just have language about, and I understand it's maybe hard to define, but the public is I think pretty supportive of a low barrier to enter concept with, like Rogue Retreat does it, people needing to meet with case managers and needing to be held accountable. And one of the advantages of having a shelter is that a case manager knows where to find their client. They're typically going to be in the shelter rather than roaming the street somewhere. But I think that the public wants and is agreeable to people being held accountable to seeing a case manager and essentially taking steps. That doesn't mean that on their first day or their first week in that they need to have ID and they need to come up with, and they need to be sober 24/7, et cetera. But I think that the public definitely wants to see that escalation of taking personal responsibility. And I'm not exactly sure how that gets worded, but I know that's what the public wants. The public doesn't want that. Ideally, yes, a managed version of 6th and A is great and way better than 6th and A, but beyond that, people want to see an escalating level of accountability. So I'd like to see something like that in there if it's possible.
and I guess the short answer is the courts are still figuring that out. I don't know whether, so with the low barrier, the entry is easy. That's the easy one for everybody. Everybody agrees that basically no conditions for entry is fine. It's whether or not you can then stay and how long you can stay. And I don't know that there's guidance on what that looks like yet. One of the reasons I'm leery of putting an actual definition of low barrier in this is because there's legislation working its way through right now that would have one of the departments actually create a definition for low barrier. And I don't want us to end up in something that defines it a little bit differently. So I'd rather that we have more of a criteria at this point than an actual definition. But the question is whether or not it's entry only or entry plus stay, and whether or not you can have a time limit on that. And I don't know the answer to whether you can have a time limit because it hasn't been established anywhere yet. So I guess we could potentially do it as, we could remove this language in our, and just leave it as low barrier to entry and see what happens with that. And, if a program isn't successful, if we get told that you have to have low barrier to stay, and then we can potentially renegotiate those issues. Because we're gonna require compliance with state and federal law. So we can put that into the contract as well and make sure that they're going, whatever our burden is on that aspect, that it will be followed.
And just to clarify again, these are parameters for grant applicants to utilize to draft their grant proposal to us, which is going to be scrutinized through the scoring system, as well as final approval is going to be through you guys as well. So if somebody presents an application and you see red flags in it, you'll be able to point them out before any money is granted.
Yep. And we can negotiate contract terms if you see red flags.
Yeah, and I had Joel and Kathleen and Indra.
Just real quick, good job on this. The navigation center, where they might not provide those optional programming, they might just refer people and have a referral to a partner. And that would be that would be the minimum acceptable. So I'm not sure they're up there, maybe I'm getting a little picky, but shelters that provide optional programming such as housing assistance, addiction recovery, mental health services, employment services, or have a referral navigation center set up to do that rather than them doing it themselves.
Kathleen and then Indra?
Well, it seems to me that anybody that's been in this area, any nonprofits in this area, know exactly what's needed. They've seen what has not been acceptable, and they see what the state is requiring. So I think, like Clint said, we will be able to see those red flags when somebody puts in an application. And I don't want any kind of, or I don't think it's wise to have any kind of city interference with how they're running their program. The state's going to do that for us, don't you think?
Yes.
So I'm just thinking the more terminology, the less terminology, the better. And as the state changes its ordinances or its laws, the nonprofits are going to have to change with them.
Thank you, Kathleen. Indra?
I agree with Kathleen. I think we're going to look over the applications. We have criteria. If we're trusting to give money to an entity, we should be able to trust them on how they're going to run it. I think not putting the definition for low barrier, they should be able to run that how they see fit. We would expect them to run it how they would feel would be the best outcomes for the people that they're managing. So therefore, I don't see that we should give higher scores for transitional housing, addiction. I mean, I think that's kind of expected, that they're going to try to put people on the pathway to success in our community. And I think the less the city interferes with what they do, the better.
So if we were doing something like that, we could then eliminate either the last sentence about the higher scoring for the optional items. We could also eliminate the criteria related to low barrier, or we can leave those in. So I think is there any other discussion on those before I find out which route you want to take?
Nope, I think
Okay.
you should present as you go.
All right. Should we leave this language in? I did add in or provide referrals as suggested by Councilor King. I think that makes sense.
So as the paragraph is shown on the screen with the changes, if you need a second to read it, and then we'll. If you're okay with how it reads, thumbs up.
I'll read it.
Oh, sorry.
To be considered fully operational, shelter services must be managed 24/7 with low barrier capacity of 150 with ADA accessibility requirements met. Low barrier shelter can have rules to address sanitation, conduct, and safety, but may not require criminal background checks, credit checks, income verification, program participation, sobriety, or identification to enter the shelter. Shelters that will accommodate couples, pets, and/or that provide optional programming such as housing assistance, addiction recovery, mental health services, employment services, or provide referrals for such services, etc., will be scored higher.
Comment? Suggestion? Okay. Victoria and then Rob.
It seems to me like we might want to take out the low barrier, but take out the first sentence and leave the second.
Rob, did you have anything to add?
I'm trying to figure out what that means. What?
I think it's take out not the definition, but the criteria of what we'd expect low barrier to include. She's saying we take that language out and just leave the 150 ADA 24/7, and the shelters that will accommodate additional things will be scored higher.
Yeah,
So the highlighted one here would be removed.
yeah.
I actually like the way it reads at this moment in time, because if you do have the verbiage about the low barrier to entry, I think that is a good parameter and a benchmark showing that the city is trying to meet that criteria, but then again, this is a grant application process, and the applicant, before awarded, will be scrutinized by you guys and so forth. Victoria?
The reason why I mentioned that is because people seem to agree with what Kathleen was mentioning, that the shelter would be, the state would be governing some of the ways that they can operate. That's why I mentioned that.
And they will govern this. This is just what are we looking for in an application?
And this is kind of like, what I look at it as like layman's terms, you're kind of setting a benchmark to where you're trying to get people to, as more of a suggestion. Rob, did you have something more to add?
So, and maybe other people understand this already, but I'm not getting it. So basically, when you say that they can't have certain requirements to enter, okay, I understand that. What does that exactly mean? Because could the operator decide that, geez, this is really tough. There's a lot of people here that are still kind of inebriated too much of the time, et cetera, behavior's tough. So it says to enter, they can't be required to be sober or require identification, et cetera. Does that mean that the operator 10 days in could decide that those requirements are reasonable? So to me, it's really, it's very unclear what that actually means over, say, beyond the first week. It's very unclear. It doesn't mean anything to me, really, because it's not definitive.
And that's where the rules to address sanitation conduct and safety come into play. So if they're causing problems under the influence, that's conduct. It's not the fact that they're inebriated, it's the fact that what they're doing while inebriated is a problem for health and safety of other persons and property. And that they can have consequences for, but not just the fact that they're inebriated.
Well, I understand, and the one that really jumps out at me more than any of them is identification. So I understand that it's not legal for us to ask for identification of anyone walking down the street or walking into this low barrier shelter. At what point is it reasonable? Or it's not clear by this?
That's an operational. We're talking about, we just need to be able to let them establish this. If they figure out that operationally they can request that identification at a certain point in a stay, or they can require somebody to go down the process of getting identification, great. But that's not something that the city has control over, because that's an operational decision as opposed to a capital, get some property, fix a building, something like that.
And that kind of goes back full circle to, realistically, if you look at Cassie from Mint presented to us numerous times, and one of their criteria is to let everybody in, but then they do diligently to try to get people identification if they don't have identification. So that could be interlaid into the operational process that they use. Any further questions? Indra and Rick?
I would like to leave the low barrier shelter can address sanitation, conduct, and safety, period. I don't see that we may not require this, or this. Is there any reason to have that part in? Because that would be their operational thing.
Because from my perspective, at least, those components are what is going to allow us to be able to say, yes, this is going to meet the city's needs. If they address that in their application and demonstrate that they're going to have no background checks, if they maintain up front, we are going to make sure that you don't have to be sober, you don't have to have ID, you don't have to do a background check to get in, then we can say, okay, that should give us the wiggle room to be able to start closing sites.
Okay, so it's for them.
Correct.
And Rick, sorry I passed you over once before. Go ahead, Rick.
So I like the wording that is in there because I think it provides clarity and really focuses on what the rules can be. But is the word may, isn't that a real important word, because it leaves the door open for them and for us to evaluate the whole picture? You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I went back and forth on this and whether it should be cannot, and the reason I avoided cannot is because of the legislation that's coming. I think may not gives us the flexibility to comply with state law.
Okay, thank you.
What if you switched may to should? Was that too defined?
That makes it even more optional.
Okay, all right. Rob?
So Stephanie, I have no idea what the laws are in this area, but is it required that a sex offender has to self-identify, or could we have sex offenders in these camps because there's no background check, there's no criminal background check, there's no identification needed? Could we have sex offenders in these camps that are potentially next to women and children, or even in the same general vicinity of women and children, or do sex offenders have to self-identify in some way?
I don't know for sure the answer to that in Oregon law. I know that there are model codes that address registering as a predatory offender. In Minnesota, if you were homeless, you had to be reporting, it was either every day or once a week, depending, to someone, to either local law enforcement or to your probation agent, and somebody had to know where you were if you were required to register. And they had provisions in there about how to do that if you were without a permanent address and homeless.
Okay, well, that's
So
another state. We
I'm
absolutely
assuming-
need to know the answer to that
I can find that out, but I'm
for the
assuming that
safety
there
of
would
everyone
be,
involved. Yeah.
there would be something similar in every state. I just don't know specifically what the state of Oregon requires, but I can't imagine that they don't have a provision for what to do if you don't actually have an address. But I will look and find out an exact answer.
Victoria?
Under the language as it is now, would operationally, which is not in the city's purview, would the entity be able to do that at some point, just as their own internal, with the way that we have it worded now?
I don't know of a law that says that, but again, with the registering as a sex offender, I don't know the exact parameters of how that has to work. As far as background checks to find out if there's an issue, once you start identifying people, then whatever public information.
I just meant background checks in general, not for any specific thing.
Again, operational. I think what we're saying is right now, what we're willing to fund, you can't require it to enter the facility.
But it does not bar operationally?
Not if it's going to be allowed under state law.
Okay.
Any further questions? Indra?
I'm going to move down to that second part, will provide. So to me, that's saying that whoever gets the grant is going to provide that. I think perhaps that's a lot. To me, that's a lot of specialties for one entity to provide all. And as we know, we have a lot of capable other nonprofits doing those things. So I would maybe change that to will partner with, however that would say, because I think expecting that whole spectrum is not really reasonable. And I think anyone that says they can do all that themselves, I don't think it's really feasible.
And that's where that last component in there, or provide referrals for such services. That would encompass, you can either provide them or help people get to those services one way or the other. And that's what's going to get you higher points.
Okay, and I don't know. I don't know that we need higher points for that, but I'm open.
I don't see any further discussion, so if you want to.
Okay. Are we good with leaving the language as it is on the screen currently? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Jumping back to the presentation, some of the direction needed, and this leads into a new basically scoring section on location. One of the comments that was brought up since our last workshop is that a lot of what our scoring focused on was the operation side and the what services are going to be provided, and not a lot about the actual location itself and what we are specifically looking for. So this would provide some more requirements as well as narrative questions that would address that location aspect. One of the first one is the zoning and permitting compliance required for an application. And I have to double check something real quick. Did I put that in there? There we go. And apparently, one of my changes to my presentation did not save. So, we're going to have a quick talk about zoning and permitting. So currently, there are 3 zones that you can put a shelter in. And I'm drawing a blank on what they are because it was on my slide. So if I can have Brad weigh in real quick.
General commercial, industrial, and business park.
Okay, thank you. So that's currently where you can have a shelter. However, that being said, there is a state law that is basically a supersiding that says if you meet certain statutory requirements, including that you have 2 years operating, you have to be a publicly operated entity or meet other criteria, or you can be a nonprofit associated with one of those, either a government or things like that. And you have 2 years of operations for a shelter, and you meet other certain site-related requirements, the zoning basically is not going to apply. So you can pretty much put a shelter anywhere under Oregon law if you meet certain statutory requirements. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that that does exist. We did get some feedback from DLCD on that interpretation, and they did agree with that. So the fact that we have only three zones only applies for an entity that's not meeting those statutory criteria and the experience levels. So with that, are there zoning permitting compliance requirements for an application that we want to talk about? And should we add a narrative question about how they would intend to demonstrate compliance with zoning and permitting? And I've got language on a lot of this, so we'll start talking about just this one first.
Joel, you had a question?
So I would just put in that location needs to be compliant with local zoning and state laws, period.
Any other question? Rob? And then Rick?
So that automatically implies then that there's no buffers of any kind. They could be right next door to a daycare or whatever.
And my understanding is that even our own zoning code does not have buffers. for those things.
Okay, so they could go right next door to anything.
And that leads actually to one of the other questions. I know you all saw the email from Councilor Benham with some suggestions. I did incorporate some of that as potential areas to discuss in this, with that location section. So that would be proximity to sensitive uses. And do we want to include that they have to demonstrate consideration was given? We could put an actual hard buffer in, or we could say, you have to tell us how you plan to make sure that there's reasonable use within whatever distance, or that you're in a reasonable proximity. We can define those sensitive areas. What you see here are ones that Councilor Benham brought up, but we can require them to tell us, here's how I'm going to make sure that I'm not having an adverse impact on those socially sensitive areas.
Kathleen, Indra, and then Rick?
I thought I saw that in the grant application already, that they were supposed to show consideration for that.
I went back to it because I thought the same thing, and I was going to modify that question, but what the actual question in the grant originally is, describe how the applicant will work with the community surrounding the project location to minimize adverse community impacts. So it's how are we not going to have an impact, not how are we reasonably separated from that use, and how are we going to make sure that we keep things apart. So I think the impact is different from separation, which is why I put a separate question in the location section as opposed to here in the impact section.
And I'm sorry, Indra, I passed over Rick already. Rick, go ahead.
So one of the zoning issues can be on ADA requirements. For instance, sidewalks have to have a ramp to a certain slope. Many sidewalks in the city do not meet that requirement. And the width of the sidewalk and the fact there is a sidewalk instead of an open ditch. So does that need to be highlighted to the applicant to know that they may be dealing with that? Because the reason for the question, I don't want the city to be obligated.
The city's only obligated to the same extent it always has been on sidewalks. So I think the way we have it framed is tell us how you're going to comply with ADA requirements. Tell it and make sure that you are complying. It's not our job to tell them what those ADA compliant areas are going to be, and the city will continue to fix sidewalks where we need to for the same thing. There is some grandfathering in where if it was done under the regulations then, until you need to fix it, you don't have to fully comply. But we're not going to be expected to suddenly make a bunch of changes just because somebody else is doing a project.
Okay, thank you.
And the ADA compliance component is defined to within the site.
Mm-hmm.
Not getting leading up to the site, because that's basically city responsibility up to that. And like you said, as you know, most development doesn't actually improve the sidewalk until development comes in. Indra?
Yes, so because it's a low barrier component, I really do not think it should be around residential or commercial. And I know a few years ago, the city council changed an ordinance to allow for our zoning for that to go into commercial areas. I would be in favor of changing that ordinance back that they cannot go into commercial area, because we've seen when nonprofits have tried to go into downtown and the uproar with that. And then just because state law says that, which we follow or other people follow, doesn't mean we have to give money to a group that does that, correct? So we can put in our grant that we want it needs to follow our ordinances. So if we change that to where it's, I believe then just industrial area, that's where they would have to go. So we could protect our residents and commercial businesses in that way. And then it doesn't interfere with state law because, I mean, we don't have to give money out. Any entity could operate anywhere right now, but that's not for us. I wouldn't be comfortable giving money with open location anywhere.
And that is correct. We could limit it and say, we are looking to fund projects in these specific zones. We could limit it with the grant.
Rob?
Yeah, I guess I brought this up, I think, last Monday, that council's kind of shooting in the dark unless we actually see, the different zoning areas and exactly to what degree that would limit an operator, and exactly what we're talking about, because unless you've got all that committed to memory, we're just kind of talking about things we don't know about. But I agree that there's some, we may want to consider exactly what does open commercial look like if it could go anywhere, and it could be literally, right next to our central business district or whatever. But I think that would be helpful to actually see those, to see what that actually looks like and how much it would limit a potential operator if they were only allowed in an industrial area, as opposed to commercial as well. So right now, we don't really know what we're talking about, but except words that we are not really defined in our mind yet.
Victoria?
So, if it were industrial only, there could still be the potential for the concerns that people have because we're a small city. I mean, it seems to me like that's a possibility. So we might be limiting an entity too much by doing that, but maybe how wide open is just an industrial only opportunity for an entity would be my question. So maybe Bradley could answer just a little bit of that to give people just kind of an idea of, okay, it's a good idea to make sure this is not by a school or a daycare, or so what would an opportunity be for any entity that wanted to pursue this grant in industrial only areas? Hopefully that's not too general.
We can have some maps available for you at a further future discussion, or on Wednesday night, even if you wanted to move forward at that point, we could have those. My recommendation, at least at this point, would be to stay within we have a zoning code that says this is a use in these 3 areas. I wouldn't deviate from that. I think that's the safest course to say, we've already said that these are the appropriate established locations. We will fund things in those appropriately established locations. And then that would get rid of that broad supersiding for at least purposes of this grant, but it doesn't mean you're trying to be more restrictive than what your code currently is.
Any further questions, Rick?
Stephanie, is there anything, the way it's worded, that if we had an applicant came in and they said they had 3 sites of which they wanted to do 50 each, that it would work instead of 1 site?
That would still work under the way that this grant program's written. It can be any 1 or more projects that we just want to get to that 150 capacity, whether it's 1 project or multiple projects.
Okay, thank you.
So do you guys want to entertain putting verbiage in that says that the grant will be awarded to an operation within our viable zones for that?
Consistent with state law.
No, consistent with our zoning laws. Because as Stephanie said, state law can circumvent that if they meet certain parameters to go into any zoning. But currently, City of Grants Pass only allows a shelter in 2 or 3 zones. What we're talking about, 3 zones.
3.
So we could put language within the grant that says the site would have to be in compliance with current zoning, or site could only be located within the permittable zonings, business district, industrial, blah, 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 blah. That's what I'm trying to get at. Kathleen, question?
So if we did that, it would get rid of a lot of that other verbiage, because then it would be clear, only these, and you wouldn't have to list all those other things that.
Those things are actually
Reasonable.
separate from this discussion. The zoning itself is what kind of property can you put it on, and then do we still want them to demonstrate reasonable separation from socially sensitive areas, access to support services, and avoidance or protection of environmentally sensitive. You're still going to want to talk about those potentially. What we're talking about right now is just, do we allow it under full-blown state law or just restrict it to the three three zones that we have said you can have this as a use?
Any further questions? Indra?
And remind me, what 3 zones were those?
There's industrial, business park, which is, it's related, but it's allows for more office kind of stuff, and then general commercial. So those are the 3 currently that a basic needs facility, as defined in our local zoning ordinance, are allowed in those 3.
Another question, Indra?
Just a statement, I would not be in favor of general commercial unless we had exclusions to that, including downtown.
Just a reminder, it takes about 4 months to go through the process to change the development code. And that is what you would be needing to do, because right now the development code is very explicit. You can, if you meet XXX, you can put this basic needs shelter in the general commercial. I mean, that is the way that today's ordinance is worded. So we would, I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we can bypass our own ordinance.
I would want to work on changing that ordinance for future use, but can we put exclusion zones then into the grant?
We could also address it under that reasonable separation from socially sensitive areas and say, explain why you're reasonably separated from those areas, even if you're technically within those zones, which I think is the safer way to go with this. Yeah. And I believe I did add central business district into that list of, Councilor Benham emailed me later on to add that one as well. So I'll jump back to, so with zoning, just to make sure we're okay on this, I've got in here that it must be located inside the Grants Pass urban growth boundary and may only be within industrial, business park, or general commercial zones. Would that meet?
As stated by local zoning code?
So City of Grants Pass industrial, business park, or general commercial zones. Are we?
Question, Joel?
Just a quick question, and that statement is legal under Oregon law.
If we're funding it, we can
Yeah.
provide those restrictions, I believe.
Okay.
If they want to do it elsewhere, they can get funding elsewhere. We're not saying they can't do it, just that we won't pay for it.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Indra?
Stephanie, why does it take 4 months to change our own zoning code for the city? I'm not familiar.
Notice and meetings and statutory requirements. So it's a time-consuming process. It takes time to make sure that we're wording things correctly and to jump through hoops.
That is the true government process. Joel, another question.
Just really quick, would we want to consider fully operational within 3 months of execution of grants agreement unless otherwise agreed to?
We're on, you're adding it to this section?
It's on the screen, so. At our last,
Just a thought.
2 weeks ago, 6 months was the consensus that everybody
Right,
came
it
to.
was. I was the one that suggested it.
Yep. But we also included that shorter timeline gets higher points.
Right.
So I think that provides some
And
push to get
as a
it
council, you guys will be encouraging expediting.
done. Right.
Our citizenry are encouraging that also.
Absolutely.
Right. So any objection to limiting to industrial, business park, or general commercial?
Are you guys okay with as it is stated on the screen? Thumbs up, please.
1, 2, 3.
Looks like we got the
Okay.
majority.
We're good. Okay. On to, and one of the things, there will be a potential narrative question that goes along with that to some extent. So the proximity to sensitive uses, I know our discussion kind of overlapped here. We have potential sensitive uses, and then, which I basically, we've already talked about. Anybody want to say we should not address that? And I'll pop up some language here in just a moment. And maybe I think on this one, I'm going to go through 3 slides, and then we'll talk about the proposed language that consolidates all of it, make it a little easier. Next one is on access to supportive services, and that whether or not we're going to require that. So that's going to be things like medical, food, appointments, things like that. And that was one of the, again, this comes from Councilor Benham's email. And then the environmental constraints that were addressed as well. We have questions.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Joel, and then Kathleen.
So that first slide you gave us on access to other services. There. Okay, access to supportive services. For the occupants of the camp, we need to have a operational navigation center, much like the police have, much like every doctor's office has, much like Options has, much like On Track has. Every one of them connects to the other nonprofits and medical providers in the community. So they, at a minimum, they need to have that operational navigation component.
Is that a question or a statement?
And I think what we've talked about was a little bit more broad than that, where really what we want is a facility that will alleviate the city's burden to provide resting sites. If they can provide those kind of services on site, great. If they can help connect people with those services and make sure they can get to those services, great. I don't think we need to require that actually on the premises. So what this, right, what this would do, and this is the potential language here, is that we're going to require proposals to identify the zoning of any proposed location to demonstrate consistency with the allowed uses. And if applicable, they have to show how they would obtain necessary approvals, permits, and/or variances in order to operate what they're planning. In addition, shelter sites must take into consideration reasonable separation from socially sensitive areas such as public and private schools, including preschools, daycares, youth serving organizations, playgrounds or parks primarily intended for children, central business district, and/or residential neighborhoods. So those are socially sensitive areas, and we want to make sure that they can at least tell us how they are going to be reasonably separated from that. Number 2 would be reasonable access to support services such as food access, groceries, food pantries, etc., public transportation, medical care, mental health or recovery providers, and/or workforce development or employment centers. So if they provide it on site, great. If they are going to help people get to it off site, great. We just need to know how they're going to make sure there's that reasonable access to those things. And then the third is avoiding environmentally sensitive areas such as flood hazard zones, protected habitats, contaminated properties, and/or other environmentally sensitive lands without reasonable protection or remediation plans. So they would have to explain, if they're looking at a site that meets any of those things, why is that still a good site, and what are you going to do to make sure things aren't going to be a problem? So that would be potential language in that section.
Good, Joel? Go, Kathleen, and then Indra.
So I think that's all really good verbiage, and it explains exactly what, would be requested of them. I just want to remind us that with the 65 non-profits in our town, all of that is covered. I mean, All Care gives tokens and transportation through Ready Ride. I mean, they've got the transportation system down in our, and everyone that has OHP can utilize that.
And that might be one of the partnerships, that whatever the entity that applies is, they may say, we're working with that organization to obtain these things to meet that reasonable access component.
And then again, I just want to clarify, we're developing a grant with parameters to get these guys to a bullseye. Basically, we're designing the box that we would need to be in. We may not cover every single exact thing or to the letter, but this gets them on target. So when we do go through the applications, they will be scored appropriately. So by the time they get to us as the council, you guys will be narrowed down to a simpler solution. And again, you'll be able to read those applications and find the red flags and so forth, and be able to go into the negotiation before the grant money is actually applied. So we are just kind of building those parameters at this moment in time. Not to ignore you guys. Aaron, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just talking with Bradley and just discussing the modifications to the grant itself. And there was one thing that was put in a previous slide that was put in within the City of Grants Pass. I think may clarify that, because I think you were talking about City of Grants Pass zoning. So looking at certain sites that has been discussed and actually has been mentioned in a public meeting during public comment, there's a property on the north end of town that an individual who said that they were going to apply for the grant is looking forward to this happening. The site that he mentioned that they also have acquired is technically, based on the definition as I'm reading it right now, not an allowable zone. It is currently industrial park. We allow it in 3 areas: industrial, commercial, and business park, but not industrial park. Industrial park is a different zone than industrial. So would it be possible? Yes, under state definition and city definition of zoning, but if you're saying only city zoning allowed in those 3 areas, then that would be an issue where that particular property would likely have to ask for a zone change. That zone change technically would be more of a spot zone, because it's not touching technically any industrial, business park, or commercial. Brad, do you have anything to add to that? Okay, I guess I said that correctly. And I just mentioned that because I just want you to be aware, and I didn't want that to come up as a surprise, but I've just noticed that as you guys are discussing, so I wanted to bring that up.
Indra, you were next, but is your question going to be regards to the new information? Okay, can you hold one sec? Okay, Rick?
So Aaron, technically the property is zoned industrial under the county designation, is that correct?
No, it's city zoning, but it's not annexed. So
Okay,
it is
so
the
we do have
city's-
city zoning on there.
Yep.
Okay, so to have clarity and flexibility, add the industrial name to the, well, it is there, industrial already.
That'd be a code change then. We'd have to,
No,
if you're, so I think the issue is, Stephanie mentioned that under our code, there are 3 zones that is allowed, but under the state, there's an exemption to where any zone would count if they were,
If they meet certain criteria.
If they meet certain
And the
criteria.
applicant or partner has at least 2 years of experience running a shelter.
I don't know what the case is of any applicant that's going to come forward, and if they can meet that requirement to be actually placed in a location that would be, that would meet that criteria, or if there are grant applicants that are not. I was just letting you aware of the conversation, just so you have the same information that just popped in my head based on your conversation today.
So with that new information, that brings in to this change that you guys did, brings that back into discussion.
So we could go back to just allowing it, whatever's allowed under local and state law, if you want to make it a little bit broader, but we'll leave that to you.
Joel?
Or could you also have it a little narrower and say industrial park consistent with state regulations?
Stephanie would probably weigh in. I probably wouldn't recommend putting that kind of
No.
constraint on it, because you're really basically it sounds like you're making a grant for a specific property. I don't think that would be wise. And again, that's not stopping anybody who's interested in a piece of property to maybe look at a zone change, but it's going to require additional time, and that's just something I wanted you to be aware of also.
Which won't meet the time parameters of your grant.
So you would
So-
either need to say, we want you to comply with city zoning, period, or we want you to comply with all zoning rules and not specifically identify anything that falls in that gap.
Rick?
I guess I know how complicated and time-consuming a zone change can be, and I think it would be prudent for us to consider the language that would allow more flexibility. Thank you.
So it has been recommended to change the language back to be more in compliant with local zoning and state zoning regulations. Is that acceptable with council? Indra?
So that means it can go anywhere in town, anywhere, and I'm not okay with that.
So that means that it would be able to go anywhere within our city zoning regulations. It would be able to go if they utilize the state regulation overlay, then they would have to meet the parameters of the state, which actually seem like they're pretty defined as being somebody that's, all it's gonna do is, I think realistically, all it's gonna do is it's gonna open up the industrial park zoning, but it will not open up residential zoning because you already have it stated in there that it cannot go into residential zoning. Go ahead.
Wouldn't that be conflicting with what Stephanie just said about the state law? So if we put state law in there, she said there are no restrictions, correct?
If you give me just a moment, I'll look up the state statute and tell you exactly what the conditions are
Thank you
for it.
so much.
Your point is very valid, but I would then reiterate throughout the language, there is a language section that says it cannot go in residential zoning. Like there was a statement in there. So realistically, you're kind of opening it up. Yes, there's that gray area where the state would allow certain applicants to, certain facilitators to go into residential zone. But if we write it down later in the grant, which it is, that you can't go in, that we're not going to give you the money if you go into the residential zone, then I think you're covered on that part of it. That's my interpretation. Go ahead.
And while she's looking that up, Aaron, you stated that the person had acquired the property, but it's my understanding that that property is not acquired in any way.
Yeah, I don't think we're parsing words here. I think Aaron was just trying to bring up the point that somebody made a public statement, that they have a letter of intent from somebody. And so we were just trying to make sure that you guys were fully aware that some of the language would limit it a little bit more constraint than other.
I get what you're saying. I just want the public to know, because Aaron said it had been acquired, and I just wanted to put out there the truth about it, just so Aaron knew, and the council know that, and the public knows.
That's fine. I was just repeating what was stated in the public meeting.
All right.
Joel.
And I do have the answer to that question.
Did you find it?
I did.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
ORS 197.783 says that the local government shall approve an application for the development or use of land for a shelter if they include sleeping and restroom facilities for clients, will comply with applicable building codes, is located inside an urban growth boundary or in an area zoned for rural residential use, will not result in the development of a new building that is sited within an area designated under a statewide planning goal related to natural disasters and hazards, has adequate transportation access to commercial and medical services, and will not pose any unreasonable risk to public health or safety. And an emergency shelter allowed under this section must be operated by a local government, an organization with at least 2 years' experience operating an emergency shelter using best practices, that is a local housing authority, religious corporation, public benefit corporation whose charitable purpose includes the support of homeless individuals and that has been recognized as exempt for at least 3 years, or a nonprofit corporation partnering with any entity described. So those are the criteria for essentially putting it outside of what the city's ordinance would say.
Rob?
Okay, so basically saying that the state law trumps anything that we're going to do here, but my question is, you just said that that's the law as regarding an emergency shelter. Well, this is not an emergency shelter.
That's the clarification that we got from DLCD, was the interpretation that emergency refers to the person's need for the services, not the physical shelter itself. So somebody coming in off the street is in emergency need of shelter.
Thank you.
What do you think?
Victoria?
If we were to go with the broader definition, and then we added the language that consideration is given or explain to us why you are going to mitigate these things. Would that protect the city from something that would be near sensitive areas and also not limit a potential person applying for the grant or entity?
I think you would be fairly safe on what you do if by eliminating the language that restricts it to the certain zones, but make sure that your response to the reasonable separation question is very highly scored, because then you put a lot of weight on the fact that, yes, you can do it in any of these places, but we want to make sure that these areas are the most protected, so make sure, you tell us how you're going to make sure of that.
Joel?
Just thinking outside the box, and don't be threatened by this. Also including lands administered by government, if agreed to by the government. So like city-owned property, if the city agrees to it, they could lease it to them, and they could use the grant to do that. If it was if the city agrees to it, or Bureau of Land Management, or the Forest Service, or the county, because all of those entities own land within the city limits.
And I think that's already covered. If you eliminate the zoning restrictions, that's already covered, because if somebody agrees to it and you can meet all the other requirements, you're fine.
So they could, in their proposal, propose a city property, and then they would, but they would have to come to some kind of agreement with the city to do that.
They could, if it met zoning and other requirements, yes. So these are the proposed prompts that would go along with these factors that we've discussed, and I think we should keep in mind the way that the questions are phrased. This is the information that we want them to provide. It would be describe the location of the proposed shelter, including its zoning and how it's consistent with allowed uses. So tell us where and how, and what permits, et cetera, would be needed. Describe how the shelter site takes into consideration the need for reasonable separation from socially sensitive areas. Describe how they will protect environmentally sensitive areas. And then there was a question about describe how there's going to be transportation to services.
I was just wanting to make sure that it was including public lands.
And if public lands are a place where state and local law would allow for it, and they reach an agreement with the public entity, absolutely. They would, broadening it to not restrict to those 3 zones would allow for that.
So I guess the question is back to you, council, in regards to leaving in the language for narrowing to only city-zoned, city-approved zoning, or change the language to city-approved zoning and state-approved zoning, or
I would just eliminate the language entirely.
take it out completely.
Yep.
Indra?
What if we award the grant heavily scored on location, because the location, they say, seems like a great location, but then they get the money, they don't acquire that location because they have to probably purchase it and something falls through? What happens then? And then they look at our thing and they can go pick another location.
Because our grant, that's where having the specificity in the grant agreement. So if this is the project they're saying they're going to do, we make it clear that that's the project they're going to do. If they say they're getting this piece of property or property that meets these criteria, we hold them to that in our grant agreement. And then if they do something else, we can either withhold the funds or recoup the funds or whatever the recourse is that we put in there. But we would put those kinds of things into the grant agreement itself to make sure they complied with exactly what they promised.
So that would prolong the process, because then they would be looking for another place, and we would
Not
have to
under
go
our
back and score over again and redo it? What?
But an application's not going to promise something that they don't think they can deliver. So we're going to hold them to what they say they can deliver on our timeline. If they end up not doing it, yes, there's a possibility that we have to figure something else out down the road. But hopefully that's not the case. It usually isn't.
Okay, back to question? Okay, no comments. Sorry. Sorry about that. So let's get back to this directing Stephanie in regards to this verbiage. Stephanie's actually recommending just taking the complete verbiage of disseminating zoning completely out. Is everybody okay with that, or do you want to?
Thumbs
just
up if you want it out, thumbs down if you want it in.
We want to.
So basically, thumbs up if you want to take the language out completely, or thumbs down if you want to change the language.
All right, I see more than half up, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we'll still have them describe the zoning and how they're compliant. We're just not limiting it to the 3 areas. All right, jumping back then to the language for the sensitive areas. Is there questions, comments, or revisions that we need on sensitive areas, reasonable access to support services, or environmentally sensitive areas?
Indra?
This was my original question. Did I hear you, or Joel said they get scored more points for having it on-site services? Is that correct?
And now that you say that, I'm drawing a blank on the answer. Give me just a moment. I don't think that they do. I think that they could. If you want that, we can make that happen.
No, I don't want that. So I wanted to make sure that wasn't, it's
it's
not in
just
there currently.
No, the current question is describe support services to be provided by the applicant and/or member of understanding and whether services will be mandatory. Doesn't say they have to be on site.
Okay, because I agree with Kathleen about we have so many services helping that, yeah.
Okay. All right, anything else on, do we want to leave this language in about kind of focusing and making sure we've got some questions to address these concerns? Okay, get a thumbs up to leave it in? 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you. And then any issues with the proposed narrative prompts, we can talk about the points values here in a minute, but the actual questions about those topics that we talked about, to have them describe the zoning, the reasonable separation, and avoiding sensitive areas.
It seemed to me like the values, do the values here just add up to the total value?
Yeah, we'll get to
okay.
all the points values in one fell swoop. I created a spreadsheet that'll make sure we cover that. I just want to know if you want these prompts, do we want to ask them to respond to these questions, yes or no? To make sure that they're demonstrating these things.
It seems these points, is it a new line item?
The
and
three
then would we reduce others?
That's how it played out, yes. And I'll walk through how that happened when we get to the scoring components. But do we want
well,
to?
I just think it's important to know now, because if we say yes and then we get to the scoring, we say, oh no, because I don't want to change that.
We'll go back and look at all the scores to figure out what you want to weight more or less from where it's at.
Okay.
So do we want to ask them to respond to these questions about the location to make sure that the concerns are addressed? 1, 2. I've seen a couple of thumbs up. Anybody else? Good. Okay, I'll move on the, one of the things that came up is whether or not we want to have how long should they have to demonstrate a continuing operations plan for? It's currently written as 10 years. That was based off of the length of the Mint grant. That's why we have that 10-year period in there. Is that an appropriate number? And is there anything else you want to talk about with that?
Kathleen and then Rick?
I think that's too long. I think 5 years, we would know whether it's working or not, and I think 5 years, and they'll probably even fold by then if it's not working. And
we're not talking about the term of the grant itself. We're talking about how far out do we want them looking when they apply for the money? Do we want them to say, in 10 years, this is where we're going to be, and here's how we're going to get there, or do we only want them to look forward 5 years? We can have whatever grant period we want.
Yeah, I think 5 years is plenty.
Rick, and then Victoria?
I would also agree with 5 years, but the other thing, the way this is written, do they actually have to purchase the property or can they lease the property?
It does not specify.
Thank you.
do a wide variety of things. We left it broad to accommodate things like that.
Yeah, you guys term the money is used to use as capital. Victoria?
I would say 5 years also, because in talking with some nonprofits, they thought, just some that have been around here for a long time, that how they have to apply, usually a 10-year would be a really long projection, and it's usually like 2 or 3 or 5. So I would agree with 5.
Okay.
Joel?
Tangential question. What happens after 5 years or after 10 years?
And that's the thing. We're not talking about the term of the grant agreement with this question. We're talking about when you apply for the grant, tell us what your next 5 years is going to look like. So
Okay.
we can have whatever grant agreement we want. We'll talk about that with the contract component. And that's actually going to be more dependent on the project itself, is how long is reasonable. All we're saying is, show us what you're going to do in the next 5 years, 10 years. Tell us how you're going to get there. 5-year plan? Thumbs up on 5-year plan? Okay, I'm changing that to 5. All right, now we will talk about the scoring rubric. And I handed out a cheat sheet because when I was going through the sample scoring sheet that I put together in there, it was multiple pages and hard to find stuff. So I wanted to consolidate it all into one single page with just the basic questions so that we could talk about scoring. Is there any, the way that this came out is I took 10 points out of operations. So originally at the last workshop, we talked about 35 points for operations. I moved 10 of those points to location. And you can see that it kind of reduced, and we hadn't set points for questions at that point either. So I just allocated based on conversations I've heard where I thought you probably wanted higher or lower point scores. We can change any of these that you want, and it will tell me if we go above or below our what we're looking for. But any increases, decreases to where we put some priorities. In the location section, I did score the socially sensitive areas higher than other location-related questions. Thank you. And just
Any
so
questions?
The columns are, current means current draft, the actual draft itself. Proposed means the changes that factored in the location questions, and the last column is for us to play with.
Victoria?
How important is C, describe how the shelter will avoid or protect environmentally sensitive areas? I just was, okay, all right. Now that I read it out loud, the full, I see it. Never mind.
Any further questions? So you currently have your scoring as project need is 10 points, location is 10 points, operation is 25 points, output is 10 points, and impact is 5.
Correct. And then when we add in the budget and budget narrative, MOU and letter of experience, we get to that 100 points. So, but what I sent out just had the actual questions about the narrative, which is the 5 sections you referenced. Should total 60 points.
Just give everybody a second
Yep.
to digest. Go ahead, Victoria.
So the 40% are which two again? The 40% remaining?
The remaining 40%?
Yes.
15 points for budget narrative, 10 points for memorandum of understanding, and 15 points for letter of experience.
Okay.
Joel, you have a question?
No, I just had a statement.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So if you don't have any questions in regards to the way the points are spread out, I would be looking for input on the way it lays out on the screen as underneath the proposed column.
Correct.
Eric?
Just a question. I thought we were going with the 100% or 100 total points. Now we're down to 60, is that correct?
100 total points is for all the components, the 60 is the narrative section alone.
I got you. I missed that. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, we get a thumbs up if you are accepting of the proposal column on how the points are distributed.
Wonderful. Okay. So then that,
Okay.
I can actually skip that, which was out of order. All right. And then the last and hardest question for everyone is funding. Currently, there is no minimum amount for the current language is there's no minimum amount for this award. Applicants may request up to X number of dollars. I had been asked to bring back an open request option, which would say something like, there is no minimum or maximum that can be requested, but we would requests that are limited and or demonstrate cost effectiveness would get scored higher. We'd have to come up with a question to ask about that. Or you can set a dollar amount that you want to offer for this grant. And I believe that Aaron provided a memo with some of those options. So this would be the time to, I guess, discuss that
Victoria?
component.
Because of all the other protections that we have put in to make sure that it's in a good place, away from sensitive areas, I think it might not be a good idea. I mean, it might not be a good idea to then limit the maximum. So yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to do that because we have put in other protections. So people might have to be, they're going to be looking for the optimal location in order to get the grant, and then to limit them further with, it would take away a lot of their options if we also did this.
Kathleen?
What would be the advantage of not setting a certain amount?
It's a little more flexible as far as what might meet the needs for the entity. It could also make it more complicated for decision making because then we have to figure out how to score what is cost effective, what do we want, what are we considering limited, and how do we want to address that. So almost every grant I've ever seen, actually probably every grant I've ever seen, has a set dollar amount that is the total award available. And there's an option to do otherwise, but most common would be to set an actual dollar amount.
So I like the second paragraph because I think it's more accommodating for the situation and would make the project move faster.
Joel?
The other thing, though, I think we need to have some kind of language in there, like city estimates up to whatever dollar amount would satisfy, so they know that we don't have unlimited resources, and that we estimate at most this much, but if you want to put in for something more and it looks like a good deal for us, then that's great.
So city anticipates this amount would be a reasonable award. However, you may present larger than that and the city will consider under reasonable circumstances.
Yeah, we'll consider it, but, you know,
It's-
I don't have an unlimited bank account.
One of the concerns about doing that too, though, is you might get someone that's like, oh, I only need 500,000, but they said a reasonable balance would be 1 million, so I'm going to bolster this, and this.
Right.
Yeah, I hear you. There's no right answer.
So Rob actually brought up a really good point in, I think, our last discussion, and basically he was prefacing the operation costs for our current situation. So what could we put in, you know, like an informational section within that basically says, these are our previous operational costs for, you know, this fiscal year, these are what our perceived operation costs for this fiscal year for the temporary resting sites in place right now, as kind of a benchmark, if you are going to leave the grant open. I mean, would that be an idea? I'm just kind of spitballing here, guys. Joel, and then Rob.
I'm not sure I would leave it up to their nimbleness in economics, but I might say that this is our operational cost for our existing campgrounds this year, and we would be considering up to 3 times that amount for the grant, something along those lines. But then too, that's got a disadvantage because then everybody and their cousin knows how much money they got.
Easiest and safest is going to be to set a hard number.
Yeah.
But once you
Rob?
get past that, you get a lot of wiggle.
So, yeah, and if you don't set a hard number, then any real estate negotiations, the operators are at a tremendous disadvantage if they think that, if the property owner thinks that, the council is going to come up with, an extra whatever, 500,000, $1 million, whatever. I think we may have seen that with the Mint situation. My guess is they probably got that property for a lot less than what the property owner was originally asking for when he thought that the city was going to pay it. So I'm really reluctant to have a no hard cap because it really takes away negotiation leverage. But I like, going back to, I guess, what we talked about before, and Clinton and Joel just mentioned, something like, 3 times our 371, to me kind of makes sense, which is whatever that is, 1.1 million. But to me, that is pretty easy to justify because we're going to be spending it anyway, either here or either the way we're spending it now, which is the way we don't want to spend it, or with something that's a lot more well-managed and a lot more sanitary and beneficial. So I'd probably be for the 3-year times what we're spending now.
And that kind of brings back full circle. You guys are, the grant is actually awarding 10 points within the scoring criteria for location. And if you don't have a dollar amount that is associated with this grant, it's kind of hard for that organization to present you with a viable piece of property, or less likely to present you with a viable piece of property. So let's narrow it down here. Those people in favor of putting a no cap, or a no price on this grant, thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay, go ahead, Indra, sorry.
Thank you. So, just the number putting out there seems so arbitrary because we're talking about 3 years of operational costs, yet the grant is not for any operational costs. So it seems like we're just throwing an arbitrary number out. And so I would agree. I'm just leaning towards leaving it open because what if, I guess my question too would be, in the grant process, I'm not really familiar with that too much. Do entities not apply for grants when they see like it's a 1 million, but this is going to be a $1.5 million deal for us? Will they just not apply, or do they apply in hopes of getting more? Because where my thoughts go is if we're going to have people not apply because it's a little more than what we put out there, but they're by far the better choice, then, that's important to me. The quality over quantity, as long as it's still reasonable, to me is more important. So can you address that?
I see what you're saying, and I think there's 3 ways that we can go here with that. Option 1 is hard cost as it's written right now. Option 2 is completely open cost, where no minimum or maximum, but we give some preference if we decide you're cost effective, which is a lot squishier. Somewhere in the middle could be applicants are, this is our hard cost. However, if you can justify a higher number, the council may consider awarding that, because we do have provisions in here that we can reduce the amount. So they can, if we set it at 1 million and they request 1.5, we can say, we like what you're doing, we'd love to give you $1 million or 1.25 or whatever we think is appropriate under those circumstances. It would give us a little bit of flexibility if they did need to come in over, but we still want that hard cost in there, I think, in order to kind of streamline what people are focusing on.
Okay, then I like that third option where there's a hard cost, but then we let them know, please don't not apply. We might consider depending on what you have to offer.
Joel?
Just stepping back a little bit, from the city's point of view, if you have two options, one is a periodic payment like the $370,000 a year, and the other option is one payment at year zero. You use an economic value called present net value, and it discounts the periodic payment back. But anyway, I don't want to go into that. The value of what we're paying now, if we did it for 10 years, that annual payment would be worth about $6 million lump sum payment. And so if we go with the value that Rob suggested of, what was that, 1.2 or whatever it was, 3 times the amount, 1.1, it is considerably cheaper present net value wise than paying that annual cost down the line.
And then I think you have to also look at it too. I think the original intent of going forward with this was kind of to help facilitate a piece of property. So you guys, and I know you didn't define it as such, but if you think of that in your brain, you've already looked at a numerous amount of property that has been presented to you. So you kind of have a feel of where a piece of commercial style, industrial style property is at. You know, you've seen everything from 1 million to 1.5 to, you know, there was a couple that were a lot larger, but so that's another parameter you can, if you as a counselor, your intention is to provide this grant money to an organization so they can help get a piece of property to facilitate it, you can keep that number in your head too. So it's just other ways to think about this too. Kathleen and then Eric?
Yeah, another way to think about it too is if one of they're getting private funding, I mean, then we might not need to put out as much. So I think keeping it a little bit flexible is a good idea, to hear what they can do first and then agree to something.
Eric?
Yeah, I just also want to point out that figure that we're throwing around, the $375,000, I believe that's a bare minimum. We're not even sure as far as to run these camps. So that's obviously a state mandate for us. What I'm saying is that figure could possibly go up here in the next couple of months. So throwing out, that's still an arbitrary number, is my point.
Joel?
So I think we should just write the bullet and put a dollar amount up there. The flexibility is up to, and then we still have discretion on how we rate it, depending on, I can't remember where does it say that, but anyway, that would also be if they come in at 500,000, they get rated higher if they, you know, for that particular criteria. But I do think in terms of letting people know what's in the ballpark from our perspective is important.
And it gets rated on in the budget section, so 15 points are there for what are you asking for and how does that relate to the city's need.
Any further questions? Stephanie, so could you reiterate the couple options that you were throwing out there?
All right, so I'm going to say the 3 options and then I'll get some guidance on which route we want to go. Option A is just a straight hard number. Option B is leave it open and broad. And option C is give a number that we expect awards to not exceed, but allow for some wiggle room if they suggest something over that we may consider it. So I think.
So option 1 is to put a hard number, thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, option 2 is to put no number whatsoever.
Okay.
So option 3 is to put a ceiling with a disclaimer of application to be determined.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I need a number.
So you have suggestions of operation costs, current operation costs of the temporary sites at 371, 375 for a 3-year, which would be 1.1, we'll just round it up, 1.2 million, or that was a suggestion that thrown out. Any other suggestions? So I guess the only suggestion was that and are you okay with me rounding up there a little bit, Rob, 1.2? So I guess 1.2 is a ceiling with disclaimer that it would be The total amount would be upon the application and the application process, but putting a ceiling of 1.2. Okay?
All right. And then I will make sure our narrative questions address that if you go over, making sure you
Was there any
explain.
other comments or anything else want to add into this? Hopefully you guys feel that you're heard here. I'm not trying to bully anybody. I was just trying to be a little more efficient here. Rob?
Yeah, on the, there's a couple different places that you address risk potential of an operator. And I know in the, the appendix section E, the E section, you know, you've got questions in there like, has the organization ever had a grant award suspended or terminated for noncompliance? Did the organization have a financial statement audit in its most recent fiscal year, you know, et cetera, questions along those lines. Now, my concern is that if, you know, it appears as if, anyway, at least one group is likely to apply that's brand new, so that has zero track record. So obviously they would never have had a grant award suspended or terminated for noncompliance, and obviously they would never have, they wouldn't have any marks on their record, positive or negative. But I would like to see some kind of background done on the board members of that nonprofit, and I'm assuming that whoever's going to apply for this is going to have a nonprofit. I'm assuming that they're going to have a board, and you know, have any of the board members had a bankruptcy, or have any groups that they're associated now have bankruptcy? Have they had any judgments against them? Criminal background check, things of that nature, because they've got, you know, this is essentially open-ended risk right now. It's like, you know, there's like no bank that's going to give a mortgage to somebody that has no credit, or a brand new entity, or someone without a job, or whatever. So right now, I'd like to know more about the integrity of the board members to somehow help to minimize our risk.
I don't think that's something that we can ask for. I don't know of any, I've never heard of a grant requiring background checks of board members. I've never heard of requiring that of the actual individuals. Any recourse that the city would have for failing to follow through with the agreement would be against the entity itself. And so that's where we need to focus. We could broaden it a little bit to include any of the partners that are recognized in the MOU, if any of them have had any of those issues, because if they're the ones also providing under this agreement, they're kind of, the applicant is on the hook to some extent for the work of those partners. But the actual individuals that are currently on the board, because what happens in the board changes in a month, then we don't have that information. So it's not as useful as it might be. The bigger concern and the reason why we have these questions in there is the entity itself. And the red flags for us are going to come from those internal controls and making sure they've got internal controls that will help make sure that our money is being spent the way it's supposed to be spent, and that they can comply with any of their future requirements. A new entity is always going to be a risk because they don't have that history. And that's why we have a letter of experience to explain why this entity has the experience needed. That's why we have the MOU to help show, here's how the partners will help support this, and we can take that into consideration. But a background check is not something I've ever heard of. I'm not even sure that it would be legal.
Kathleen?
Could you go back to those dates, that timeline? I can't remember what was on the 14th. That was added.
The 14th is when responses to questions would be due, would be July 14th. So we have a provision in there where questions can be asked in writing, and then we will make public the responses to those questions, and that any questions we receive, there will be guaranteed a response on or before July 14th. We'll post it on the website. It'll go out to anybody that asks to have that information. Okay.
So any further questions in regards to changes and sections that we've gone through today? Rob?
Yeah. So again, getting back to the risk part, if someone were to be found to be in non-compliance, say a couple years in, and let's just say that they got a grant from us for $1.2 million, if they use that for a piece of property, would the city be able to recoup our grant in the form of that piece of property, or what exactly, what kind of teeth do we have in any kind of non-compliance situation?
And that's the last section. I was actually just about to move to that. The language that I had unintentionally omitted last time we met was grant agreements may include provisions that withhold or cancel unexpected funding. So if we haven't given them the money yet, we can back out if they are not being compliant with our agreement. We can require repayment of expended funding, so we could potentially recoup money that's been expended. We can require city rights or interest in capital acquisition for projects that are not compliant. I can imagine that we would require, as part of our grant agreement, if it's a purchase of real property, we are going to require some property interest rights in that so that it reverts to us, or we have a $1 right of refusal, something of that nature, if this falls through, if there's real property involved. We're going to have to get a little creative on some things depending on what the actual project is and how it's played out. If they want to lease property, we're going to have fewer teeth than buying real property, if they're buying real property. And so we'll have to figure it out, but we're going to, whatever teeth we can do to make sure that we either get money back or get an asset if this falls apart, we're going to put that in the grant agreement.
Any further questions? Okay.
Then with that, I think I've gone over all of the substantive changes that are since. And that leads us to our council's options for today. We can schedule this with just all the revisions and things we've just discussed. We can schedule that for council action on Wednesday or a different date. That was our original timeline, was we were going to talk about it on Wednesday. If we delay it past that, I'll update the timeline to change that. You can direct us to come back with a revised draft for further discussion, or you can say, I think we're done at this point and we can walk away.
Joel?
June 18th.
Kathleen?
I agree. Second it.
Okay, so I'll bring it back to council for action or discussion. I'd be looking for directing staff in either of the three scenarios. Joel has a recommendation on the floor right now to schedule council action on June 18th, this Wednesday. Consensus from the council?
Okay.
Looks like you have direction?
I have direction. We will have the agenda packet out with the new materials as soon as possible. I just have to accept all the changes and make sure it looks right.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time and consideration today, Stephanie. Okay, at this point, it looks like we've gone through our business and we are at agenda review. Everybody has been awarded a copy of the current council schedule for workshops and meetings on the dais. If you had a chance to review it, or if you brought stuff previous, the floor is open for agenda discussion. Kathleen and then Joel, sorry.
I was wondering if we could bring a workshop on the municipal court potential and what we could include and not include.
So we're working on a memo for council. We're doing some research. That's one of our top priorities we're working on right now. And so once we get information that we can provide council, we'll bring that forward to you.
Perfect, thank you, Aaron. Joel and then Indra.
I had two items, and the council, other members of the council may have the same items. One is the pool, coming back to us with a operational budget for trying to reduce our maintenance costs on the pool. And the second one then is the caretaker's cottage at Riverside Park, with the findings of our consultant and the expenses, not sending the letter of interest out until after we're done. We review the letter of interest at the workshop, and then also, if needed, what additional funding beyond grants, because I know that I don't think we've applied for any grants either, so we need to know the status on the grants that the specialist said that we probably would get. And then funding needs after that to have a good project with the private sector where they would finance part of the improvements, and we would finance part of the improvements. So I'd like a workshop on that. Pool and caretaker's cottage.
Okay, thank you, Joel. The Caveman Pool is already on the to-do list to jam it into our schedule as soon as possible.
Okay.
And we will put the second item on the to-do list to discuss on putting it in an upcoming workshop.
Thank you, Mayor.
Any further, Indra?
So at the last meeting, we talked about and supported putting on the agenda a nomination for vice president, and I don't see that on for Wednesday for a potential action.
Was that brought up in one of the times I wasn't here?
Oh,
Yeah, I think
Okay,
it was the last workshop. If
That's what I'm
council,
saying, I can't answer your question, so I'll default to Aaron on
if
that.
council wants the nomination of vice president to be at the June 18th meeting, we can add that also, just like we're adding the contract. So it would just be under appointments, and we'll do that.
Eric?
As far as executive sessions go, is there somewhere where we can schedule that so we can see what's going on with the current injunction, with the rest of the parks that we're getting? Is that an appropriate time to talk about it right now or later?
I don't have an update right now. We are still in discussions. We're expecting a response in the next couple of days and should have more information soon, which we'll pass to council.
Okay, any other comments, questions in regards to agenda review? All right, thank you very much. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, I will adjourn this workshop and everybody can go free. Thank you. Thank you for all your time and consideration today.